Sandra, with her head held high, entered their expensive restaurant with her mature and handsome son. It was his idea to celebrate her birthday at the restaurant. His girlfriend, Naomi, was with them. A visit to such a restaurant was certainly beyond their means. Sandra had resisted for a long time when she heard where her son wanted to take her on her birthday. "Mom, just answer me. Have you ever been to a restaurant? I don't need these restaurants. When you and Naomi come, I'll prepare something delicious. We'll sit together as a family. Why spend money when you're saving? This is not up for discussion. The table is already reserved. And in the morning, Naomi will come to you, and you'll go to the store together to choose a new dress. That will be our gift to you." This conversation took place yesterday. And today Sandra, in a new dress, walked into the restaurant where she had never dreamed of going before. She felt joy in her soul, joy from her son's thoughtfulness. But at the same time, she felt sorry for his money, which he and Naomi needed. The young couple was saving for their wedding. That's why Sandra's 22-year-old son was doing his best. He worked as a driver during the day and tried to taxi on his own car in the evenings and weekends, a car that Sandra bought him when he turned 18. Although Sandra entered the restaurant with her head held high, she still felt a little uncomfortable there. But not wanting to upset her son, she smiled until the menu was brought. "Well, what are these prices? I can cook so much for that money." Sandra's expression changed. "Mom, forget the menu. Naomi and I will order everything. I beg you, don't think about money today. Just enjoy the evening. We want to create a festive atmosphere for you." After the restaurant, we also planned to go to the movies. As the dinner in the restaurant was coming to an end, the relaxed woman suddenly felt uneasy again. There was a persistent feeling that someone was staring at her. She slowly looked around and locked eyes with a man sitting in the VIP zone of the restaurant with a young beauty. Suddenly, Sandra, with a hoarse voice, said, "Henry, Naomi, let's go already." "Mom, you and Naomi haven't finished your wine yet. Let's go outside," Sandra insisted, even though she knew it was too late. Seeing the man rise from his seat and approach them, he took a chair from a nearby table, placed it next to Sandra, and sat down. "Well, hello," he said leisurely. "Shall I introduce us?" The man addressed Sandra, although he was no longer looking at her, keeping his gaze on Henry, assessing him. Sandra lost her voice and couldn't utter a word. The man continued, "Well, since you don't want to, I'll introduce myself. My name is Albert. And what about you, young man?" "I'm Henry," replied the young man, not understanding anything, constantly shifting his gaze from his mother to this man dressed in an expensive suit. Sandra's breath caught. In her thoughts, she went back to events 22 years ago, when she, a young girl in a thin calico dress, stood soaked to the bone in the cold rain in front of Albert's house. And how he, then poorly dressed but handsome, yelled in her face, "I've told you everything, Sandra. Why did you come? I will never agree to this child. Abortion, and only abortion. I will not, you understand, not burden myself with a child at this age. I want more, to make a name for myself, earn money. I never intended to leave you, Sandra. I love you. But we will stay together only under one condition. If you have an abortion. If not, I don't want to see you anymore or know anything about you. Live your life the way you want." And now, sitting at a table in a restaurant in a beautiful dress, while her son looked back and forth between her and their unfamiliar man, Sandra suddenly said loudly and clearly, "Remember, Albert, what you told me. You said, live your life the way you want. What do you want now? Why did you approach us?" "I didn't approach you. I approached my son." "Mom, what's going on here? Can someone explain to me? You said that I don't have a father. He died before I was born." "Your mother lied to you, Henry," said Albert. "I'm your father, and as you can see, alive and well." "All right, that's enough." Sandra, now composed, slammed her palm on the table, and decisively stood up. "Henry, have you paid? Let's leave immediately." Henry and Naomi also stood up and obediently followed Sandra to the exit of the restaurant. However, the woman working ahead could not see how Albert, for a couple of seconds, held Henry by the sleeve and handed the young man a business card, whispering, "Call me." Henry twirled the sturdy plastic card in his hands, on which, in golden letters against a black background, was engraved, "Albert Smith, CEO." Sandra and Henry went to the park, not far from the restaurant, and there, sitting on a bench, the mother recounted the bitter story of Albert's betrayal. The son, silently listening, asked, "Do you think Albert betrayed you, and do you not think so?" Sandra retorted, "Is it normal, in your opinion, to abandon a pregnant girl? Of course, I considered our relationship serious and never expected such a betrayal. I told you, son, about our last meeting with Albert in our youth when he advised me to live my life alone. After that, we never met again. I heard that he inquired about me from mutual acquaintances and knew well that I had given birth to his son. But he never bothered to show up. For the first 2 years, I waited, hoped. Then I stopped waiting and forgot. I raised you on my own, and I'm proud of it. Mom, I love you too. But look, this is your perspective. From Albert's point of view, things probably looked different. You didn't plan this pregnancy together, did you? And, as you say, he had different views on life. He wanted to become successful first, and then have children. Son, what's the point of these conversations now? Are you trying to defend Albert? To tell me I'm wrong? No, Mom. I will be grateful to you all my life for everything you've done for me. The most important thing is that I always felt your love, and that love compensated for the absence of a father. I never felt like I was living in an incomplete family, thanks to you, Mom. But still, I'm curious about this Albert." After the conversation with his mother, several days passed, but Henry still couldn't calm down. Occasionally, he would take out Albert's business card. Naomi didn't like any of it. She didn't like Henry's father either. After a chance encounter, Albert hoped that Henry would call him. However, as time went on, no call came. But Henry eventually made the call. Then Albert, trying to sound indifferent, arranged to meet his son in a familiar restaurant, eagerly anticipating the meeting. When his son arrived, Albert admired him. As Henry approached, Albert gestured toward a chair. "So, what did your mother tell you? That I abandoned her while she was pregnant? And all that? Did she forget to mention that the pregnancy was entirely unexpected? I didn't want children back then, and I made that clear to Sandra. But now, I'm ready to admit my mistake and try to make amends. I'm a wealthy man, and it turns out you're my only heir. And you, what do you do for a living?" Henry. Naomi was taken aback when Henry, returning home from work earlier than usual, announced to her, "We are invited to dinner with my father." "Father? What other father?" the girl exclaimed. "To that man, Albert. You did meet with him after all." "Yes, Naomi, I did. A couple of days ago. I decided to hear him out, and it turns out he's not such a bad person. It's just that he and my mom have different perspectives on life." "But what about your mom? How will you tell her about this? And you're already calling him your father." "That was fast." "Naomi, I'm asking you, let's not argue. This is my decision, and please accept it. I haven't fully decided yet if we'll continue to interact with Albert. And for that reason, you and I will go to dinner with him tonight." Seeing that Henry couldn't be persuaded otherwise, Naomi went to get ready for this dinner. And when she appeared before him, Henry looked at her somewhat hesitantly. "Naomi, maybe you won't wear jeans. Put on the dress you bought for your friend's wedding." "Oh, so formally. A dress?" The girl chuckled. "Are we invited to a social event or something?" But when Henry and Naomi arrived at Albert's mansion and entered inside, the girl was glad she had followed her boyfriend's advice to wear a dress. In jeans, she would have felt out of place. Even the servants were better dressed. Naomi had never been to such houses before, just like Henry. The girl thought with annoyance that Henry didn't even hint to her about how wealthy his so-called father was. A girl in a luxurious, form-fitting dress, with a radiant smile on her face, hurried to meet them. There wasn't a flaw on her face, as if she came straight from the cover of a glossy magazine. "Hello, you must be Henry, and this is your girlfriend. Albert asked me to welcome you. I am Albert's lawful wife. My name is Susan." The girl, with a hint of disdain, surveyed Naomi from head to toe, and she wished she could disappear. Even the dress she bought for her friend's wedding didn't compare to Susan's outfit. Not to mention that Albert's wife was adorned with jewelry like a Christmas tree. Naomi, out of all valuables, only had modest gold earrings, a gift from her parents on her 18th birthday. Albert and Susan were hospitable. Only Naomi, who had never tasted some of the dishes served by the staff, and honestly, not knowing how to use certain tableware, felt awkward, and she was surprised that Henry was quite at ease. It seemed like the guy had no sense of discomfort at all. Despite not knowing all the tableware, he didn't hesitate to ask in a joking manner. Naomi began to feel that Henry was in his element here, and she was somewhat of an extraneous, foreign element. It seemed that Albert and Susan were trying to emphasize this. After dinner, Susan suggested everyone move to the living room for drinks, as the hostess put it. It was there that Albert initiated a conversation that led to him inviting Henry into the house. "Let's put it this way, Henry. How long do you plan to work as someone else's chauffeur? It's foolish in these circumstances. Now that we've found each other, I want to make you an offer. Will you work in my company as the head of the purchasing department? That's a start, and we'll see from there. Maybe you'll even grow to be my deputy." Naomi choked on the wine she was trying to casually drink, imitating Susan. But Henry, it seemed, was not surprised at all. Apparently, there were some prerequisites for this conversation. The guy, thoughtfully, replied, "I don't even know. I could, of course, give it a try. But how will Mom react to this?" "Mom? Well, what about Mom?" Albert briskly exclaimed. "I'm by no means trying to turn you against Sandra, but I think any mother should wish the best for her child. If she's a good mother, she'll only be happy. Yes, I didn't take part in raising you. I'm guilty. But now I can offer you a better future. And why? Why should Sandra object?" On the way home, Naomi and Henry returned in silence, each lost in their thoughts. And only when they were in the apartment, Naomi asked the guy, "How will you tell Mom about this? That you accepted your father's offer and will now work for him? Despite all of Albert's words about good mothers and everything, I know your mother won't be pleased at all. And I understand her." "I know that too," Henry replied. "You know what? Let's not tell Mom anything for now. I'll work for a bit. Take a closer look at the place, at my father. Maybe I won't be able to do it myself." "Why won't you be able to?" Naomi thought. "Everything will work out for you. You communicate with them so effortlessly. And this newfound father, such charm. Now he'll do everything to keep you close." Naomi turned out to be right. Henry quickly adapted to his new job. Everything came easy to him. On the second day, he came home in a new suit. Very expensive, as Naomi immediately noticed. "Where did this luxury come from?" "My father insisted. He said I should dress like this for work. Susan helped choose and paid for it, saying it's a gift from Dad." "Did you even realize that your father's wife is only a couple of years older than us?" "Yeah, Susan told me herself," Henry casually replied, oblivious to his girlfriend's worsening mood. A couple of weeks later, while waiting for Henry in the evening, Naomi remembered that she forgot to buy bread for dinner and stepped out of the house, intending to quickly run to the nearest store. That's when she saw a luxurious foreign car entering the yard, the name of which she didn't even know. And behind the wheel of this car was her boyfriend. Henry, seeing Naomi, spread his arms in a somewhat surprised and joyful manner. "Can you imagine? My father insisted that I drive this car. No, and no again," Naomi exclaimed categorically, looking at Henry with indignation, who had just innocently suggested she move into his father's house. "I kind of expected that," said Henry, nonchalantly continuing to play with the pasta that Naomi had cooked for dinner. "Why did you even suggest that? How did it even come to your mind? We live separately. Why do we need to move to that mansion?" Dad strongly insisted. Henry shrugged. He said the huge house is empty. It's boring for him and Susan. Why not? But since you're against it, we won't move. Henry didn't fully disclose to his girlfriend. In reality, Albert suggested that only his son should live with him. Albert didn't like Naomi, and he didn't hide it, telling his son that such a girl was not suitable for his status. Henry then firmly told his father that he didn't want to hear such words about his girlfriend, whom he loves and plans to marry. Either his father accepts Naomi and never dares to look sideways at her again, or Henry leaves immediately, both from the company and Albert's life. The man reassuringly raised his hands, assuring his son that he wouldn't allow anything like that again. He even said that if his son wishes, he can move into his house with Naomi. However, Naomi still couldn't calm down. "No, look at you, living in your father's house. What are we going to do there? How will I cook dinner for you? In the kitchen, alongside the servants. You don't need to cook there." Henry tried to interject, but Naomi didn't let him. Yes, I know. You don't need to cook there. The servants do that. And we'll either sit in our room or spend evenings in the living room, with a glass of wine. Is that it? Well, I barely made it through that evening. Barely waited until we left. This is not ours, Henry. Can't you feel it? "No, I don't feel it," sincerely replied the guy. "I enjoy talking to my father, and I didn't feel any awkwardness." "Better answer me this. When are you going to tell your mom everything? About your interaction with your father? About working in his company? Why, when we go to your mom, do you put on your old clothes and drive there in your old car? Do you realize what will happen if your mom finds out everything from someone else? Do you know what she will feel? That she's been betrayed for the second time. Only your betrayal will hurt her much more." Henry lowered his head. Naomi touched a nerve. She was right 1,000 times over. It's necessary to tell Mom. Delaying it any longer is not an option. But how difficult it is to do. "Let's go to Mom right now." "You're right. We can't postpone it any longer." Sandra was delighted with her son and Naomi's visit. "Oh, how great that you came. And I just bought a cake. I felt like having something sweet. Let's go to the kitchen. We'll have tea." "Mom, wait." Henry grabbed his ready-to-leave mother's hand. "Don't rush. We are not here for no reason today. I need to tell you something. I've been in touch with Dad for a long time, and I even work for him in his company," the guy said, deciding not to postpone the difficult moment. "Mom, why are you silent? Say something. I understand it's uncomfortable for you." "Uncomfortable?" Sandra exclaimed loudly. "Do you think so? Uncomfortable? That's not quite the right word, son. Painful. That's the right word. I don't understand why. Mom, you're still the closest person to me. But Dad turned out not so bad. He wants to make up for his guilt to us for all these years. He gave me a job in his company, with a salary that I could hardly imagine before. He gave him a car." Naomi added. "A car?" Sandra asked. "Even that? A good, probably expensive one. Now you must be ashamed to drive your old car. What will you do with it now?" "Mom, stop it. Yes, Dad's car is very expensive. But I can clearly see the proportion of these gifts. For Dad, giving me this car cost nothing, and your gift will always be much more valuable to me." When Henry returned home, he couldn't sleep. The guy went out to the balcony and, in the darkness, smoked one cigarette after another, lost in thought. Naomi came to him, silently wrapped her arms around him, laid her head on his shoulder. "Naomi, did I do the wrong thing?" Henry asked in a hoarse voice. "Am I guilty before Mom?" "I don't know," the girl whispered. "It's not for me to judge you, but your mom is hurt. It truly hurts her. And what do you command me to do now? It's very difficult for me right now. My mom's face is always in front of my eyes, as if I really betrayed her. But I didn't want that, I swear. I just wanted to get to know my dad. And then, well, what then? Yes, I accepted his offer. Why not? Tell me, Naomi. If we have the opportunity to live better than we did before, why should I reject it? What should I do? Quit the company? Stop communicating with Dad? You know what?" Naomi slightly pulled away from the guy and looked him in the face. "I would be glad if you did. Yes, we have money now. We drive a fancy car. As you say, I can even stop working now. But I don't need all this. I only needed you. And I was happy with you, saving pennies for our wedding. And now, I have a feeling that wealth is pulling us apart." "But that's not true, Naomi," exclaimed Henry, hugging the girl tightly. "Emotionally, I haven't changed how I feel about you. I still love you and my mom. I just want to change our standard of living. Why can't you understand that? Did you seriously mean what you just said? Do you want me to break ties with my dad? I would like that, but I see that you don't want it. And I'm afraid that if we insist with your mom now, pressuring you, you'll agree. But that will make you unhappy. You'll regret lost opportunities all the time. So, maybe we should just leave everything as it is." Henry sat in the restaurant, gazing at the girl sitting across from him. She was provocatively beautiful. Henry was starting to regret allowing his father to drag him to this restaurant without Naomi. Albert had mentioned it would be a dinner with a business partner, failing to mention that this partner would bring his daughter along. The girl flirtatiously introduced herself as Layla and extended her hand for a kiss, which Henry, of course, did not oblige. Albert and Layla's father were engrossed in discussing business matters, leaving the young ones to converse. And converse Layla did. She chatted incessantly, talking about a newly opened nightclub, a famous singer who invited her there, a proposal she declined. Of course, Henry mostly listened in silence, studying his new acquaintance with interest. Yes, undoubtedly, the girl was luxurious. He wouldn't have dared to approach such a person before. And now, here she was, sitting in front of him, batting her eyelashes. Henry couldn't help but compare her to Naomi. Naomi was also beautiful, with a natural charm, but compared to Layla, she seemed quite simple. Yet, Henry loved his Naomi. Spending time with Layla might be an option if he weren't in a committed relationship, but he had no intention of betraying Naomi. When Layla and her father bid farewell and headed towards the exit of the restaurant, Albert asked his son to stay a little longer and have a private chat. Once the business partner and his daughter moved away from the table, the man asked Henry directly, "So, how do you find Layla? I thought this meeting was staged. Dad, why are you doing all this? You know, Naomi and I are serious. We're preparing for our wedding. What about your Naomi? It's time to look at girls of a higher class. Look at Layla. Her father has more money than me. And now we are trying to create a joint project, combining our capital. It will be something grand. And if we also become relatives, Dad, are you trying to make me part of a deal? I'll never participate in these games of wealthy people, in calculated marriages, and everything else. And I won't abandon Naomi, as you did to Mom. Don't count on it." "Calm down, Henry. Sit down," Albert said calmly. No deal. I just wanted to introduce you to Layla for comparison, so you could see the difference. What kind of girl could be with you and who is with you now? You need to think more broadly." I said stop, Dad, otherwise, I'll leave. Besides, I'm already late. Naomi is waiting for me." Henry glanced at his watch and quickly left. Albert watched his departing son, then ordered another drink. The man needed to think. He had already firmly decided to marry Henry to Layla, and they had even discussed it with her father. Layla had agreed in absentia, but Henry was stubborn. Albert had huge plans. Soon he was going to make his son his deputy, teaching him all the intricacies of managing the company. For the first time in his life, the man felt he had a family, a real family, his son. And this feeling gave him the strength to develop, increase capital, all for the sake of his family. However, his son turned out to be stubborn, living modestly with that fool Naomi and planning to marry her. And Naomi was truly foolish. They had money now, and she could easily stop working. But she continued to drag herself to her accounting job every day. And her appearance. With money, Naomi could have made herself look even more stunning than Layla. But again, she didn't bother to do that. But the most important thing is not that. Naomi is the daughter of ordinary working class people, and marrying her holds no promise of anything good for Henry. But if the son marries Layla, Albert dreamily smacked his lips. He was accustomed to always achieving his goal, and therefore, he pondered for a long time. Sitting in the restaurant and sipping elite alcohol, Albert decided to act step by step. The first step would be to separate Henry from Naomi. But how to do it? His son would never leave that girl willingly. So, doubt needed to be planted in the young man's mind about his girlfriend. What hurts male pride the most? Of course, infidelity. Therefore, it was necessary to create a situation for Naomi to betray Henry. And if that failed, just straightforwardly set up the girl. The next morning, Albert didn't go to the office, but went straight to a well-known talent agency, whose director was his good acquaintance. After sharing a cup of coffee, Albert got down to business. "I have a request for you. I need a young actor, someone not yet known but very good-looking and artistic. Of course, the guy shouldn't have high moral principles. Someone willing to do anything for money. Any candidates?" The director called his secretary. "Sharon, bring me the portfolios of all our actor candidates, aged 20 to 25. When the secretary left, the man winked at Albert. "We'll find you a handsome and unprincipled one in no time." Naomi, returning home after work, tried to prepare a shrimp dish she found on the internet for dinner. The doorbell rang. Naomi quickly wiped her hands, thinking it might be Henry who forgot his keys. However, an unfamiliar guy stood at the door. Naomi's head spun from his smile. "Excuse me for bothering you. I'm your new neighbor." He pointed to the door of the adjacent apartment, which had been vacant since the last tenants moved out. "So, my name is Kevin. I just moved in today and wanted to make scrambled eggs. I bought the eggs but forgot about salt. I know it sounds banal, but do you have any salt?" Henry was in a hurry. There was a lot of work at the office, but Albert urgently needed some documents that Henry left at home. His father asked him to quickly fetch them. Henry steered straight to his entrance and waved off the fact that the car was blocking the way, thinking he would quickly run up and then back. While running, Henry grabbed his keys, went up, and rushed into the hallway, only to be stunned. A completely naked guy emerged from the bathroom, and, noticing Henry standing silently in the hallway, he nonchalantly walked to the kitchen, where the clinking of dishes could be heard. Henry followed, and from the kitchen doorway, he saw the naked handsome man approach Naomi, wrap his arms around her from behind, kiss her neck, and distinctly say, "You were amazing today. I really enjoyed it. No one has been better in my bed." Naomi quickly freed herself from the neighbor's arms, realizing it was indeed him, and turning, she saw both of them simultaneously. Naked Kevin and a shocked Henry. Kevin pretended to have just noticed the entering Henry and yelled, "What's this? You said he wouldn't be here until evening." Henry moved toward the stranger, and he kept shouting, thinking Naomi's boyfriend was about to hit him. "Just not in the face. Not in the face." With these words, Kevin tried to shield his face with his palms. For him, as an actor, his face was the most important. However, he didn't manage to do that, and Henry's punch landed on his jaw. Kevin could have remained standing, but he deliberately fell, hoping that Henry wouldn't hit a man lying down. And that's how it turned out. Henry, already raising his foot for a kick, changed his mind, turned around, and without saying a word, stormed out of their apartment. What was that? Kevin, why are you naked? You just asked to use the bathroom to wash your hands. And what were those words? Do you understand that Henry might think something happened between us? Is this some kind of joke? Prank? Naomi continued to protest, but Kevin wasn't listening. He rushed into the bathroom, hastily put on the scattered clothes, and left, entering the neighboring apartment, which the guy rented for only a month. Kevin grabbed his phone and dialed Albert. "Hello," Kevin said into the receiver. "Everything went as planned, I believe. However, your son beat me up. I think I deserve additional compensation for that." "Fine," Albert replied in a satisfied tone. "Now pack your things and leave that apartment immediately so that Henry won't see you again. When he regains consciousness, he might start investigating what happened. We don't need that. Leave right away." Kevin was only too happy about this. In this apartment, which was only needed for the job, he had a few things. He quickly stuffed them into a bag and left the rented place. The guy was proud of himself. Just a few days ago, Albert had scolded him severely when Kevin said that nothing was working out with Naomi. The girl blushed when he was around but didn't yield. She remained faithful to her boyfriend. Apparently, she genuinely loved him. "So, we need to act differently," Albert shouted. "If seduction fails, then set up a situation. Why am I paying you such money? To blink your eyes there and then report that nothing is working out. Listen here. In the coming days, I'll arrange for Henry to come home during the day. Everything should happen when Henry is usually at work. Once my son leaves their office, I'll call you. And by the time he reaches home, you must create a scenario there so that no one suspects anything." Kevin figured out how to do it but was afraid. What if Henry flew into a rage and hurt him or even killed him? Despite this fear, the guy took the risk. It was challenging, coming out of the bathroom, to pretend not to notice the person standing in the hallway. But Kevin considered himself a good actor and pulled it off brilliantly. Alone in their apartment, Naomi couldn't understand what had happened. Just 10 minutes ago, a new neighbor had called her, saying that his faucet was broken and blocked, and they cut off the water. He asked to use her bathroom to wash his hands. The girl reluctantly let him in. She was already starting to dislike this handsome guy. He was too persistent. He kept hitting on her, disregarding her words about having a boyfriend she planned to marry. Of course, the new neighbor was very handsome, but Naomi had no intention of cheating on Henry, whom she loved. Breaking out of her stupor, the girl began to realize that Kevin set her up. This scene was staged intentionally. There was no other explanation. But why? Why did the neighbor need this? Naomi started calling Henry. 1, 2, 3. The 10th time, Henry didn't answer the phone. During this time, Henry was speeding in his car. He didn't return to work. Instead, he turned into the first bar he came across and began to drink heavily. For the first time in his life, he felt the urge to do so. Henry thought alcohol would dull the burning sensation in his chest. To say that Henry didn't expect this from Naomi would be an understatement. He was as certain about his girlfriend as he was about himself. Although lately, there were signs. Not long ago, an old lady near the entrance muttered after him, "Naomi has different men in her apartment during the day and another one in the evening. Isn't she ashamed?" Back then, Henry just chuckled, thinking that the old lady must have confused the apartments. Within a few minutes, he had forgotten her words. But now, those words resurfaced sharply in the memory of a guy who couldn't know that this granny was not his neighbor but a random old lady from the street. brought here by Albert. The man gave the granny some money and told her to say the prepared text to Henry. Sandra looked at the sobbing Naomi, who sat in her living room on the couch, huddled up with her legs underneath her, crying continuously while recounting what had happened for the third time. About the new neighbor who betrayed her, about Henry who left and hadn't been in touch since. On one hand, Sandra felt sorry for this girl right now, but on the other hand, even Naomi's story raised doubts in her mind. Why would a completely unfamiliar guy, who, according to Naomi herself, recently moved into the neighboring apartment, act this way? The girl says that the new neighbor is very handsome, so maybe she couldn't resist. And now, she came up with nothing better than to tell this implausible story about a cunning guy deciding to set her up. Sandra, Henry is not answering my calls. Maybe you can call him. Invite him here, but don't tell him I'm here. And when he comes, I'll try to explain everything to him. What's there to explain, Naomi? Sandra asked a bit harshly. It all seems strange. You say the neighbor inexplicably betrayed you, but did you try to talk to him? To ask why he did it? Of course, I tried. I stood in front of his apartment door for an hour, called incessantly, but he didn't come out. Then, I found out the phone number of the landlady of that apartment. Kevin rented it from her. So when I called this woman, she told me that her tenant had moved out. Didn't even ask for a refund of the prepaid rent. He ran away. Then, Sandra said thoughtfully, how convenient. And, of course, you don't know where to find him. How should I know? I'm telling you, I only knew his name. I don't even have his phone number. So, will you call Henry? No, Naomi. I won't call him now. You say all this happened a couple of days ago. And since then, Henry hasn't been home. Yes, that's the point. He did show up. Only when I wasn't home. He took all his things and left his keys to the apartment on the kitchen table. This indicated that it was over between us. Why don't you want to call him? Apparently, Henry doesn't want to see you. And I can imagine how hurt my son is right now. It hurts and offends. I've been betrayed too, you know that. Somehow, I understand my son. I'll call him. And then what? What will you tell him? You haven't said anything coherent to me. Your words are too implausible. And on top of that, this neighbor who quickly disappeared, and there's no way to talk to him anymore. Naomi, let's agree on this. We'll talk to Henry later, without you. I'll tell him your version of what happened. For some reason, she suddenly felt uncomfortable with the presence of the girl, and the woman wanted her to leave faster. Sandra, I considered you my mother already. Why don't you believe me? I never thought it would turn out like this. Waiting for the girl to close the door behind her, Sandra grabbed the phone and called her son. Henry sat in the living room of his father's house, holding a glass of whiskey. His tongue was getting tangled as he exchanged jokes with Susan, who was sitting in the chair opposite him. His mom had called recently, asking him to come over, but Henry didn't want her to see him in this state. He claimed to have urgent matters and promised to come tomorrow. Since the moment Henry caught his girlfriend with a stranger, he had been drinking. For the first time in his life, he was drinking like this. Alcohol made it a bit easier, but the image of the handsome guy embracing Naomi and kissing her neck kept appearing in his eyes. From the depths of the house, Albert's voice scolded the servants, and Susan jumped up from her chair. She hadn't left the living room when Albert himself, with a displeased look, entered with wide steps. Seeing the intoxicated Henry, his expression darkened even more. Albert approached his son, snatched the whiskey glass from his hand, and, with a sharp motion, splashed the alcohol on Henry's face. Henry tried to get up but was too drunk. With a gentle push, his father made him flop back onto the couch. Albert shouted, "What are you doing, Henry? You've been drinking for 2 days. You don't show up at the office. Work is at a standstill. I understand. Your girl cheated on you. And what? Life ends here. Are you ready to drown yourself because of her? Naomi will enjoy her life, go out with other guys, and you'll turn into an alcoholic. I've told you many times about my father. I won't let you become an alcoholic. I drink, you see that, but I know how to drink, and I'll teach you. This isn't the way, especially over some girl. It was deep into the night, and Henry was sound asleep in one of the rooms on the second floor of his father's house, where he had been living since leaving Naomi. He didn't hear the door of his room quietly creak open, and Susan slipped inside. She dove under the covers with Henry and began to kiss him. "No, go away. Not today." Henry pushed away the girl as he woke up. "I missed you, Bunny. Don't worry. Albert has been asleep for a long time. I've asked you 100 times not to call me Bunny. I hate these affectionate nicknames. Always have. Can you remember that? And even if my father is asleep, I'm telling you, not tonight." Susan pouted her plump lips, creating a hurt expression on her face, although Henry couldn't see it in the darkness. "So what's going on? Have you been avoiding me for a week now? Do you no longer like me?" Henry didn't know how to answer Susan's question. Did she stop liking him, or did she never like him at all? She came to him one night, almost immediately after he started living in his father's house. At that time, he didn't push her away, desperate from Naomi's betrayal. He wanted to distract himself, forget. Back then, he didn't care that he was sleeping with his father's wife. However, since then, Susan had been coming to him more and more often at night, and Henry was fed up with it all. Tired of hiding from Albert, tired of Susan herself. There was something else. "Listen, Susan, today my father once again tried to convince me to date Layla. This time I agreed. But what about us? What about our relationship?" "What relationship? You are married to my father. Did you forget? I don't understand what you were expecting. Please leave. I want to sleep." Susan left Henry's room upset. All her plans had fallen apart. The girl felt that her time in this house was coming to an end. She had become a nuisance to Albert. Susan understood that, so she jumped into bed with his son, hoping to cling to him at least. But even here, she failed. Henry leaned back on the bed and tried to fall asleep again, but he couldn't. Thoughts of Naomi overwhelmed him. Again, about Naomi. How much longer could he endure this? How could he get her out of his head? After his girlfriend's betrayal, Henry agreed to his father's suggestion to date Layla. Frankly, Henry didn't care. The main thing was not to think about Naomi. Henry immersed himself in the company's affairs, becoming his father's deputy. He handled everything on the fly, and Albert was proud of him. The man saw that his son was becoming tougher, more decisive, and the fact that something broke in Henry after parting with Naomi, Albert considered even a blessing. "It's good. You shouldn't get attached to women. You should treat them like consumers." Sandra was deeply frightened by the changes in Henry, somehow coping with the fact that her son communicated with his father and, moreover, began to live in his house. Sandra found it very difficult to see how Naomi's betrayal affected her son. With each new visit to his mother, she observed how her son became tougher and closed off. Henry constantly gave his mother expensive gifts and left money. A lot of money. Sandra refused to take them, arguing with her son. But it was in vain. "Mom, understand. I earned this money. It doesn't matter that it's from my father's company. It's my salary. And I really want you not to deny yourself anything now. It brings me joy to think that you lack nothing." Henry fell silent, then whispered to himself, "Even if it brings me some joy in life." These sad words echoed in the mother's heart. Henry sat on a kitchen stool, and they were about to have tea. The woman approached her son, placing one hand on his shoulder and the other gently stroking his head. "Son, are you struggling? I see how you're tormenting yourself. Did Naomi try to talk to you again?" "She tried, many times. She called, and once she ambushed me at the office exit." "And what? Did you talk?" "She was talking nonsense about the new neighbor harassing her. Supposedly, he set her up. But firstly, she could come up with a better excuse. That justification was just too implausible. And secondly, if the neighbor was bothering her, why didn't she tell me about it? Why stay silent? No, Mom, Naomi is no longer a part of my life. Besides, Dad says that you shouldn't get attached to women. I've started dating Layla. She's the daughter of a very wealthy man. Dad is planning a new project with him. It's something grand. Henry, don't tell me you're planning to marry for convenience, Sandra exclaimed, not letting her son finish. Not you. Why do you need this? Do you even like this girl? Layla, like or dislike? Henry shrugged. What's not to like about her? She's beautiful, not burdened with too much intellect. In general, she's what a man needs. Son, don't be so cynical. Don't become like your father. The luxurious wedding of Henry and Layla echoed throughout the city. Both Albert and the bride's father wanted all the wealthy people in town to attend the wedding. They even hired a famous singer for the entertainment of the guests. Everything was top-notch, and the young couple looked happy. Layla was genuinely satisfied. She had liked Henry from the start. The girl obeyed her father in everything, as she was entirely dependent on him. If she had chosen her husband, her father wouldn't have allowed it. It was good that he had chosen a young and handsome guy for her fiancé rather than a boring old man. Even in that case, Layla would have had to submit, or she would be left without money, which the girl vehemently disagreed with. Henry was disappointed by his mother's absence at the wedding. Sandra was only present for the signing of the marriage certificate and left afterward, despite Henry's attempts to persuade her to stay. Seeing Albert sitting with him at the same table was beyond Sandra's strength. Of course, this moment saddened Henry, but on the other hand, he understood and did not blame his mother. From the outside, this wedding seemed too hasty. The couple hadn't even met for 6 months. The wedding preparation took much less time than usual for wealthy people. Albert had pressured Henry to push Layla for the wedding to happen as quickly as possible. Henry understood why. Things between Albert and Layla's father were not going well. They disagreed on the new project. Albert was used to acting aggressively and taking risks, both in life and in business, while Layla's father favored a cautious approach. Albert hoped that after becoming relatives, their business partner would become more accommodating. Henry was okay with it. Immersed in the business, he was becoming similar to Albert in this regard. The joint project with Layla's father also captivated Henry. The wedding roared. Expensive drinks flowed like a river. Fireworks lit up the sky, while somewhere on the other side of the city, Naomi wept bitterly. She buried her head in a pillow, shut herself in her room at her parents' house. Until the last moment, she hoped that this wedding wouldn't happen, that Henry would come to his senses and come to her. In the initial days after Henry left her, she feverishly tried to run around, prove something, relentlessly calling him. She wanted to explain, find Kevin, but he simply disappeared. Naomi found a way to track down the guy. She approached the landlady of the apartment where Kevin lived. Naomi knew that the landlady, when renting out her place, always took the passport details of her tenants. She tearfully told the woman that Kevin had taken a large sum of money from her and disappeared. The landlady believed her story and gave Naomi a photocopy of Kevin's passport, which she hadn't thrown away yet. Naomi hoped to find her offender, not alone but with Henry. To achieve this, she went to his father's office and spent the whole day circling around, hoping to catch a glimpse of her beloved. And she saw him. Towards evening, Henry rushed out the doors, pretending not to notice Naomi, swiftly heading to the parking lot to his car. She caught up with him, tried to grab his sleeve, explaining, but Henry didn't even listen, shaking her hand off like an annoying fly. That's when Naomi got angry with him for the first time. What on earth was this? She was running after him, jumping around him, not guilty of anything. And Naomi stood there, watching with resentment as Henry's car pulled out of the parking lot, not regretting that she hadn't had a chance to tell him about the photocopy of Kevin's passport lying in her purse. At that moment, she decided that she needed to give Henry time, and if their love was true, he would come back on his own. Henry didn't come back. Naomi waited and hoped. The news of Henry's upcoming wedding with the daughter of some local oligarch hit her like a blow. But even then, a tiny hope continued to warm Naomi. Right up to the wedding day, the wedding celebration was coming to an end, and Henry excused himself to the restroom. While washing his hands, a drunken Susan burst into the men's room. "Susan, why did you get so drunk? You'd better go home right now, or Dad will be angry." "Your dad?" Susan hiccuped. "I couldn't care less about what your dad says. I don't care anymore. He announced that he's divorcing me. Can you imagine? I must have bored him. Maybe he found someone younger. Did you know about this?" "No. I didn't know anything about it, honestly. I'm surprised. Just like you." "Yeah, I'm not surprised." Susan waved her hand. "I told you it was heading this way. That's why I tried to build a relationship with you. Out of desperation, you could say. When I married your dad, he made me sign a prenup. Otherwise, he wouldn't have married me. And following that agreement, if we divorce, I get nothing. I'm really sorry. When I saw you for the first time, I thought you were different, normal. But now you're just a copy of your dad. But I don't want to be left with nothing. And you'll help me with that. You'll sponsor me with money. Well, unless you want your dad to find out how we were having fun behind his back. I don't care now, but Albert will change his attitude towards you. Or if you want." With these words, Susan leaned towards Henry, wrapping her arms around his neck. "We can continue seeing each other. I don't mind. I enjoyed being with you." Henry didn't have a chance to do anything, to answer Susan, or push her away, because Layla entered the restroom, saying, "Henry, are you here? Everyone is looking for you. Some of the guests are leaving. You need to say goodbye." Seeing Layla enter, Susan was not at all embarrassed. She continued to wrap her arms around Henry's neck, looking at the bride with a drunken smile. The silent scene continued until Henry unclasped the hands of his stepmother and pushed her away. Henry expected Layla to explode with emotions, accuse him, express disapproval. However, he saw none of that on the face of his now wife. Layla remained completely impassive and repeated, "Henry, we need to say goodbye to the guests." "Layla, don't you think we need to talk? I have to explain everything to you." "And what is there to explain? I saw everything. Are you sleeping with her? That was in the past. But I don't intend to continue, and you are not the least bit bothered that she's your stepmother." "It bothers me. It bothers me a lot. I feel guilty. It's also awkward. I was upset back then, you know, when Susan and I understand." Layla shrugged indifferently and tried to move on. "Layla, I don't get it. Are you okay with all of this? You witnessed a very awkward scene and yet remain indifferent. What's next? What are we going to do now? We're going to live together. Do you think I don't know that all rich men always cheat on their wives? I have a living example in front of me, my father. But I have one very important request for you. Make sure I never stumble upon such scenes again. It was unpleasant for me. You need to be smarter, Henry. And now, let's go to the guests." Henry understood that the situation was almost a repetition of the past. Once, he caught Naomi with a neighbor and vividly remembered the pain he felt at that moment. Because he loved her. And Layla, there wasn't a muscle twitching on her face. It seemed like she didn't care at all. Henry felt a bitter taste at this thought and for their impending marriage. The next day, the newlyweds left for their honeymoon. It was Henry's first time abroad and by the sea. Layla was simply enchanting. She smiled and looked like a happy bride. Instead of rejoicing in this, Henry emotionally distanced himself from his wife, realizing that her love for him was just a pretense. She created the appearance of a happy marriage, and it seemed she could keep it up for a lifetime. Henry felt uncomfortable. For the first time, he felt out of place in this environment, where external gloss was more important than feelings. How could he lie with this girl, knowing that there would never be intimacy and warmth between them? Moreover, Susan didn't leave Henry alone. Even during his honeymoon, she sent messages, reminding him that he now owed her financial support, and she was waiting for his return. In vain did Henry hope that Susan had said all this under the influence of alcohol. The girl was seriously planning to blackmail him. Reading her messages, Henry keenly felt his guilt towards his father. Upon returning home, Henry learned that Albert had hastily divorced Susan, and the girl had already left his house, where, by the way, Henry and Layla were supposed to live initially. Lila's father had given them a cottage in a prestigious area as a wedding gift, but Layla planned to remodel everything there according to her taste. It would take time. Therefore, after the honeymoon, the newlyweds continued to live in Albert's house. Upon arrival, Henry tried to immerse himself in work to distract himself from the troubling thoughts that haunted him. However, just a few days later, Susan called him and insisted on a meeting, instructing him to come without fail. Otherwise, she warned, things would turn bad. Henry made a decision for himself. He wouldn't succumb to Susan's blackmail and wouldn't get entangled further in this web of lies. Susan's call caught Henry in the office, and he knew his father was currently in his own office. Henry decisively headed to that office and found Albert in a gloomy mood. The man sat behind a desk, surrounded by a pile of papers, and, barely looking at his entering son, gestured for him to come closer. "I was just about to talk to you. Work on the project has stalled. Your father-in-law." "Wait, Dad. Let's talk about business later. I also wanted to talk to you, but on a personal note. I slept with Susan in your house right after I broke up with Naomi. It went on for a while." Henry's surprise was palpable when Albert, briefly raising his head above the papers and glancing at his son, said, "I know." "What do you mean you know?" Henry asked, bewildered. "And how long have you known?" "From the very beginning," replied Albert, flipping through documents without lifting his head. "What do you think? I'm completely oblivious and don't notice anything in my own house. I don't sleep as soundly at night as you might have thought. And what? You're not going to do anything about it." "I've already done something." "Why do you think I divorced Susan? You never asked me once." "And what about me? Why didn't you do anything to me?" "This is betrayal," Henry almost shouted. "I don't consider it betrayal. You're a man, and men are prone to such things. It happens. Besides, you're my son, and I'm, in a way, guilty before you because I didn't participate in your upbringing. Let's consider this topic closed and not revisit it." Leaving his father's office, Henry felt even more distressed than when he entered. His father's forgiveness didn't bring him relief. On the contrary, he once again realized that there was no place for sincerity in this environment. Henry urgently wanted to see his mom, the only person whose love for him was genuine and who would be with him through thick and thin. Despite Susan having nothing left to blackmail Henry with, he decided not to cancel the meeting with her. He wanted to tell her everything in person, face to face. Henry approached the meeting place in his car, spotting Susan from a distance. He braked near Susan, and she quickly hopped into his car. She pecked Henry on the cheek and playfully asked, "Where are we going?" "Nowhere. We'll talk in the car. I'll find a spot to park." "Well, what did you want to tell me?" "You know it yourself. Your father left me without money. Didn't even let me take my jewelry. He's a miser. I won't give you any money, Susan. I told my father about our relationship, and you know, he wasn't surprised. He knew everything. I didn't expect you to stoop so low. Weren't you afraid your daddy would disinherit you and kick you out of the company? There's still something human left in you. But don't worry, it will peel off like a husk over time. living in an environment like your wife and daddy. Everything real in your life was that girl of yours, Naomi. Maybe if you stayed with her, you wouldn't have lost the last shreds of humanity. But you messed up again. What do you mean messed up? Henry asked roughly. Susan hit a nerve. Use your head. Do you think she would have cheated on you? Explain to me immediately what all this means. What do you mean Naomi wouldn't have betrayed me? Then how did what happened happen? I'll tell you something interesting about your Naomi if you cover at least some of my debts. Well, give me money to cover them. Shall I state the amount? Yes, go ahead. But keep in mind, this is the first and last time. I'll give you the money. You give me the information. Then don't ever contact me again. Agreed. Susan beamed. Send the money. What I want to tell you is that Naomi didn't cheat on you. It was all orchestrated by your daddy. How orchestrated? What are you talking about? I saw everything with my own eyes. I don't have direct evidence. Albert didn't let me in on his dirty dealings. But we had a conversation. I told him back then that you would never marry Layla and leave Naomi. And he replied that your relationship with Naomi had only a few days left, at most. That's the first thing. Second, I overheard his phone call. Albert was talking to his acquaintance, the director of an acting agency. He thanked him for an actor who handled the task well. And after hanging up, he joyfully informed me that Naomi was finished. Is that proof enough for you, Father? How could he do that to him? This is called ruining a life. Yes, there's no other way to put it. Albert played with him like a puppet. What kind of paternal feelings could there be in this case? It turns out Henry was just needed by his father as a chess piece on the board. Albert needed his wedding to Layla. After dropping off Susan, Henry drove aimlessly around the city for a long time. He didn't want to go home and see Albert and his wife. Layla was, in principle, not involved in this. She was also following her father's instructions. Who knows, maybe she had her own love, disapproved of by her parent. After cruising through the city, Henry went to their only place, to the only person he wanted to see now, to his mom. Sandra was already getting ready for bed, but seeing her son at the doorstep, she was delighted. Oh, you're so late, but it's okay. I'll put the kettle on now. The woman hesitated, seeing the troubled expression on Henry's face. Something happened, son. Yes, something happened, Mom. I'm entangled. Entangled in life. I'm doing everything wrong. You were right. I betrayed you by moving to Dad. It's not about the money, I swear. I thought he was a normal person. Acknowledges his mistake made in his youth and wants to fix it. And now I see that Albert is a soulless man, with only money in his eyes. And he doesn't need genuine human relationships. Maybe he understands in his mind that I'm his son and wants to mold something out of me in his image. It turns out he acted with me like with a puppet, without feeling anything. He set up Naomi. She wasn't guilty of anything before me. I don't know how yet, but I know for sure it's him. I'm a fool. I betrayed you so easily. Betrayed my beloved girl. And money won't replace love. I've realized that. What's the point that I have them now? But I don't want to go back to my wife. Henry looked at Albert with disbelief. Just moments ago, Henry told him that he knew everything about how his father had separated him from Naomi. Henry expected Albert to deny his involvement, but the man had no intention of doing so. Yes, he said firmly. I did it. I hoped you take a step in the right direction. Otherwise, you would have continued to stagnate in that swamp with your Naomi. Your conscience wouldn't let you leave her. But now, everything turned out quite well. I hired an actor, and he played his role well. And you seem to be out of the woods. What complaints do you have against me? This conversation took place at home, in Albert's office, where the man sometimes worked in the evenings. Henry, who had been pacing and gesticulating impulsively, suddenly weakened. He approached his father's desk and sat on the edge of a chair, looking closely at Albert's face. Henry suddenly realized that all his reproaches would fall on deaf ears, as Albert was confident in his righteousness. It was pointless to persuade or accuse his father. The man viewed life from a different angle and didn't consider himself guilty of how he treated Naomi. Still, Henry made one last attempt. Now, in a quieter voice, he said, "But I loved her. I loved Naomi, and I still do." Now, Albert jumped up from his seat and paced around the office, shouting indignantly, "What love? Yes, I don't dispute that some feeling that everyone calls love might exist. But, as a rule, it only hinders people. Understand this already. I, in this life, loved only one woman, your mother. Yes, yes, don't look at me so surprised. That's how it is. But if I had married her back then in my youth, would we be sitting here now in this house? No. Life would have taken a completely different course." "So, that's what it meant," Henry said thoughtfully. "I thought you regretted how you treated Mom. But you still think you did everything right. You know what, Father? I'll go to Naomi right now and apologize for my distrust. And everything between us will be like before. We'll be together and happy. But to you and this house, I won't return, nor will I go back to work in the company." "And have you forgotten something? Anything that you're married? You have a wife. In your opinion, are you going to just, I'll divorce Layla. I'll explain everything to her, and she'll understand. There's no love between us. And if she doesn't understand, no harm done. She won't be devastated without me." Albert continued to shout something at his departing son, but Henry no longer heard him. He hurried to Naomi to beg for her forgiveness. Naomi's parents lived in a small private house, and Henry headed there, assuming that Naomi had moved in with them. "Hello, Monica. I would like to talk to Naomi. Is she here?" "What do you want to talk to her about? My daughter doesn't associate with married men. Why did you even come? Hasn't she shed enough tears because of you? The girl has just settled down and started living. Go away from here." Naomi saw Henry from the window of her house, and her heart pounded furiously, although she didn't want it to. No, she didn't want this. Naomi had imagined the meeting with Henry many times, wanting to remain calm and composed. However, upon seeing Henry, she couldn't control her heart or the wave of heat that swept through her body. She walked into the yard and heard her mother's final words as the woman ushered Henry away. "I'll talk to him, Mom," Naomi said, trying to remain calm. "Don't worry about me." Naomi's mother disapprovingly shook her head and went back into the garage, and Naomi gestured for Henry to leave through the gate. "Let's step out of the yard." "Henry." Naomi appeared entirely composed, but inside, she was barely holding back the storm raging within her. "Naomi, please forgive me. I am so sorry for what I've done to you," Henry began as soon as they were outside the gate. "I've learned the truth. There was no betrayal. It was all orchestrated by my father. He sent that doctor to you. This Kevin guy, supposedly our neighbor, turned out to be a hired doctor. He deliberately staged that scene. I don't know how he ended up in the apartment, but I understand everything now." "So, that's how it is," Naomi exclaimed. "Your father went to such lengths. I was an undesirable daughter-in-law for him. Now, you have a better wife. All this time, I wondered why Kevin did that. Now everything falls into place. I just don't understand why you came now. Did you suddenly want to expose Kevin? Why now?" "I came to ask for your forgiveness. I'm guilty before you. I didn't believe you. Forgive me. I married out of foolishness, out of anger towards you. I was convinced you betrayed me. But, Naomi, I love you, only you. I'll divorce and leave my father. Everything between us will be as it was. This life, it's not for me. My place is with you." "Love, you say?" Naomi smirked. "If you loved me, you would have heard me then, believed me. Actually, you wouldn't have even doubted how I believed in you, how I loved you. I loved you then, but not now. I don't love you. Our relationship was a mistake. Leave. Go to your wife. Your place is right there. That can't be. I can't forget you. Remember how good we were together. You're saying all this out of spite. Naomi, you couldn't stop loving me. What can I do to make you forgive me? Want me to get down on my knees? Don't you dare. Don't create a circus for me here. I've made myself clear. I don't love you anymore. Besides, I have a boyfriend. Yes, don't be surprised. We're together, and everything is fine. So, leave here and never come back. Naomi watched Henry leave her house with icy calmness. He couldn't know the effort it took for her to play this indifference. Of course, she lied. She lied a lot. She didn't feel indifferent. She couldn't forget Henry. But she had decided for herself that they weren't meant to be. Yes, she waited for him to come. Yes, she hoped. But after his wedding, she tried to forget. Tried, but couldn't. The only thing the girl didn't lie about was that she had a boyfriend. Naomi met him almost immediately after Henry's wedding when she started going out with friends. This guy's name was Alex, and Naomi immediately responded to his courtship, trying to immerse herself fully in this new relationship. However, Naomi couldn't make it work. Alex was entirely different from Henry. There was no closeness or emotional warmth with him. Moreover, the guy was a bit rough and superficial. Alex wasn't concerned with Naomi's inner feelings. As Henry drove away from Naomi, he could barely control himself. His foot pressed down on the gas pedal, and the nimble car gained speed. Henry's thoughts, however, were far away. He couldn't believe that the recent conversation between him and Naomi was real. It seemed like just a short while ago, she was begging him to listen to her, wanting to explain herself. But now, she stood before him, cold as an icy rock. Additionally, Naomi mentioned that she had a boyfriend. Henry's brain simply refused to believe it. Someone else was holding her, kissing her. The car sped down the road, ignoring all speed limits, and Henry, with an unfocused gaze, stared straight ahead, carefully passing an empty pedestrian crossing. He parked on the side of the road. He folded his hands on the steering wheel and buried his head in them. He didn't see another car parking behind him. It was Albert's car. The man, getting out, sat in the passenger seat next to Henry. Henry lifted his head without much surprise. "What are you doing here? Were you following me?" "Yes, I followed you, right from our house. I saw how you talked to Naomi. Judging by the way you sped away, the conversation didn't go well. She didn't forgive me. Be happy. But it doesn't change anything for you. I won't come back to your house. No, I lie. I will come back, just once, to get my things and tell Layla about the divorce. That's why I came after you." "What divorce? What did Layla do wrong to you? If Naomi doesn't want to forgive you anyway, why divorce your wife? Think about how it will look. You are divorcing right after the wedding. What has Layla done wrong to you? And this to Patia. Why do you want to leave your home, your job? If you don't want to talk to me, fine, don't. But don't quit your job. It's your future. Besides, you enjoy working in the company. I'm your father, whether you like it or not. We are different in character and views on life. I believe I did the right thing. Maybe someday you'll even thank me. Who knows? Do you want me to promise that I'll never interfere in your life again? Just don't leave now. Don't make hasty decisions that you might regret later. Get out of the car, Dad. I don't want to hear anything. And I don't want to see you either. I don't know anything myself. Don't know how to live on. But I have to think about it without you." All right. All right. Albert raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I'll leave now. But promise me you'll think about what I said. And think about Layla, who hasn't done anything wrong to you." After Albert left the car, Henry started the engine and pulled away. Only now he drove slowly, obeying all traffic rules. He knew where he was heading, any club. There, amidst the booming music, he would try not to think about Naomi's words, about her not loving him anymore, and the fact that she had a new boyfriend. The next morning, a worried Layla descended from the second floor and found Albert having breakfast in the dining room. "Do you know where Henry is?" the girl asked. "He hasn't come home since yesterday. His phone is off." "Did something happen?" "Yes, something happened," Albert replied, taking a sip of coffee. "I can't explain everything right now, but Henry is going through a tough time. He needs some time to distract himself. I know where he's been. Don't worry, he's fine. Give your husband some time. It's so easy for you. We've been married for such a short time, and he's already not coming home to sleep. Besides, we're in the middle of renovations at our cottage, and he was supposed to go there in the morning, check on the workers, give instructions. Am I supposed to handle all of this myself?" Henry didn't come home for 3 days. Albert knew where he was. His man was keeping an eye on his son from a distance. Henry went on a wild spree, and Albert's only job was to calm the infuriated Layla. Early one morning, Henry woke up in an unfamiliar room. A naked girl slept next to him, her face unfamiliar to him. However, judging by everything, he had spent the night with her. A hangover headache hit Henry as he awoke. Looking around, he remembered he was in a hotel, struggling to get out of bed and trying not to shake his head too much. Henry attempted to find his phone in his pockets, which turned out to be dead. As he stared at the dark screen, he suddenly recalled how he had called Naomi in a drunken stupor, begging, cursing, threatening to beat up her new boyfriend. He had called many times, only succeeding in making Naomi stop answering his calls. Suppressing the desire to continue the binge and party, Henry began to dress. The first thing he needed to do was charge his phone and call his mom. Layla, he would visit himself. "We need to get divorced," Henry declared to Layla, barely appearing at home after a long absence. Before entering the house, Henry made sure Albert had gone to their office, not wanting to encounter him. "What do you mean? Get divorced? Are you completely out of your mind?" "I don't love you, Layla. I love another girl. We were dating long before you. We were planning to get married, but then we broke up. Thanks to my father." Henry, as planned, revealed the whole story of Naomi's supposed infidelity, actually orchestrated by Albert. He even told Layla how he had gone to Naomi to apologize. At this point, Layla calmed down a bit. "She didn't forgive you, you say? So what's the problem? You won't be together anymore. Why do we need a divorce? Haven't you heard what I just said to you? I don't love you, Layla. Why should we maintain this marriage? Do you think I love you? Yes, I like you, nothing more. But I consider our marriage very fortunate. We are both young, beautiful, and with our parents' money, we can enjoy life. Eventually, you'll inherit your father's fortune. He officially acknowledged you as his son, and he did it right before our wedding. My father insisted on it. Notice. And what do you think? Why did he need it? To be sure he was giving his daughter to the son of a wealthy man. Now our fathers have a joint business, into which my father invested a huge amount of money only because of family ties. What do you think? How will he react to this divorce? He'll crush us both, just like Albert. So he set up your little girl. And what of it? He did it because he wanted a better future for you. Do you think my father allowed me to date whoever I wanted? Nothing of the sort. But I didn't throw tantrums like you're doing now." Layla could see that with each word Henry spoke, he became darker and more distant. She realized that such speeches wouldn't convince him. The girl decided to change tactics. She burst into tears and spoke pleadingly. "Henry, please, no divorces. What will it bring you? Your girlfriend still hasn't forgiven you, and you won't be together. Let's keep living as we were. Who knows, maybe someday we'll love each other. I can't. I just can't go back to my father's house. He'll start controlling every step I take, blaming me for the divorce, and finding a new candidate for a husband. Before you, there was one option that still gives me shivers when I think about it. Please, Henry, let's not change anything. All white. Let's live together a little longer. Let's see how it goes. But on one condition, we're moving right now to the cottage your father gave. I don't want to live in Albert's house anymore, Henry. But we can't move right now. The renovation isn't finished yet. Henry was adamant about moving immediately and insisted on it. The girl had to endure considerable inconvenience while people worked on the cottage they urgently moved into. Time passed, and outwardly, it seemed like Henry had calmed down. He lived with Layla and even returned to work at his father's company, albeit after much persuasion from his wife. However, he tried to have as little contact with Albert as possible, only discussing business matters with him. Albert didn't intrude, wishing to give his son more time, believing that Henry would eventually realize his father was right. But Layla and Albert knew that Henry, despite his calm appearance, still harbored anger. This manifested in his almost daily binges. Henry became a regular at clubs and often didn't come home at night. Sometimes, in the morning, he woke up in unfamiliar places with unfamiliar girls. Henry started resembling a typical playboy, spending money left and right. Sometimes, when the longing became especially strong, he went to Naomi's house, parking his car a couple of blocks away. Henry worked there, hid in the bushes, and observed as Naomi escorted another guy home. The girl hadn't lied. She was indeed dating someone new. He kissed her, and Henry's heart shattered into pieces. Afterward, he usually went to a club, drank, and tried to drown his pain by getting acquainted with another girl. He promised himself 100 times not to go to Naomi's house anymore, but he couldn't help it. Time passed, and his legs took him there on their own. What did he hope for? That Naomi would come home alone in one beautiful moment. But even if that happened, even if she broke up with her new boyfriend, it didn't mean she would forgive Henry. The girl was too sure when she said she didn't love him anymore. At home, Layla was waiting for Henry. Sometimes, she got angry and created scandals. But overall, Henry knew she didn't care. She didn't care where her husband spent his nights. The main thing was to maintain the appearance of a happy marriage. Before her father, before the people around them. The only outlet for Henry was his mother's house. Or rather, the apartment. A new, spacious, 3-room apartment that Henry himself bought for Sandra. He immediately registered it in his mother's name, and despite her protests, he made her move there. In addition, Henry regularly transferred part of the money earned in the company to his mother. Sandra saved it in a bank account. Only at Henry's mom's house did Henry feel comfortable. He could talk about anything, be himself without pretense. Sandra was always ready to support her son, but her support couldn't replace Henry's love for Naomi. 1,000 times, Sandra regretted not believing Naomi, who was crying on her couch back then. She doubted, seeing Henry suffer. Sandra went to talk to Naomi, although she didn't tell her son about it. The girl met her calmly, without anger. After hearing their apologies, she responded, "Sandra, you know, I always treated you well. Of course, there was anger towards you when you didn't believe me. But, after calming down, I understood you're a mother, and you'll always be on your son's side. Back then, it seemed to you that I hurt him. I don't hold it against you. Believe me, it's true. But I won't return to Henry. Never. He should have believed me. Otherwise, what kind of love is that?" From Henry's perspective, it seemed like Naomi had excellent relations with her new boyfriend. But that wasn't the case. Alex turned out to be someone with whom Naomi was not comfortable. She didn't want to nestle into his chest, hug him just because, share how her day went. Moreover, Alex turned out to be terribly jealous. He envied Naomi to every passerby. He constantly thought she was flirting with every man she met. He expressed his complaints to Naomi in a rather rude manner. Once, He even pushed her. At that time, she didn't pay much attention to it. Naomi continued to date Alex, deep down realizing that she couldn't love him. She tried not to pay attention to his jealous outbursts, feeling guilty. After all, in reality, her thoughts were not with him. She still loved Henry, even if she didn't want to admit it to herself. It was the afternoon of a weekend day, and Naomi stood in front of the mirror, examining herself in a new dress. Her mother entered the room. "Are you ready? By the way, the dress suits you very well. Have you really decided to meet Alex's parents? Maybe you're rushing things. I don't know, Mom," Naomi replied with a lack of enthusiasm. "Alex has been persuading me for a long time, and I agreed." "Well, what's the big deal? It's just meeting parents, not a wedding. As far as I understand, for Alex, this is a very serious step. He's bringing you to his house as a bride, and he intends to introduce you to his parents in that way. Are you ready for that?" "I don't know. Why not? Alex is a serious guy, hard-working, but not Henry," Naomi's mother finished for her. "I see. You don't love this Alex. There's no passion in you like there was with Henry. So why complicate things for both him and yourself?" "Oh, Alex has already arrived," Naomi said, looking out the window. "So, are you going after all?" "Mom, his parents are waiting for us. They set the table. Alex's older sister and her husband will be there too. It's up to you, of course, but I think you shouldn't give the guy false hope." Alex's parents turned out to be very friendly people and warmly welcomed Naomi. Dinner went on a cheerful note. After dinner, Naomi offered to help Alex's mom with the dishes and started carrying dirty plates to the kitchen. In the corridor, Naomi stumbled awkwardly, and uneaten fruits from the plate in her hands spilled onto the floor. She bent down to pick them up and unexpectedly collided forehead to forehead with Alex's sister's husband, who had just come out of the room and rushed to help her. The man started making jokes about the awkward situation, and Naomi laughed, rubbing her bruised forehead. Then, behind her, came Alex's displeased voice. "Naomi, it's time to go." "What do you mean, time?" Alex's mom peeked out from the kitchen. "How about having some tea?" "We won't be having tea," Alex replied in his usual brusque manner. "We were planning to go to the movies." He improvised on the spot. Naomi was surprised, but she didn't argue with him. Friendly saying goodbye to Alex's relatives, she left their apartment. They had only descended one flight of stairs when Alex began yelling at her. "I see you like my sister's husband. Ha! You've been making eyes at him all evening. But don't get too excited. He's already taken and loves my sister." "How dare you?" Naomi raised her voice too. "I was just trying to be friendly with your relatives. I'm tired of your jealousy at every turn." Naomi hastened her steps, trying to get ahead of Alex to cool him off a bit. However, he caught up with her and unexpectedly pressed her against the entrance wall, grabbing her by the throat. "Where do you think you're running off to? Don't like hearing the truth? Then act like a human being. Let me go," Naomi whispered, trying to pry Alex's hands off her throat. "And then what? What will you do to me? Complain to your ex-boyfriend? What's his name? Henry. Only problem is, he dumped you, probably for a reason. You're probably lying about the setup. Most likely, your ex caught you in bed with someone else. I can see your true nature." Naomi regretted a million times that she had told Alex about her past relationship at the very beginning of their acquaintance. How many reproaches had she endured from her new boyfriend regarding Henry? But he had never declared anything like this. Naomi felt offended, and despite Alex holding her by the throat, she gave him a resounding slap. Alex released his grip, and in response, he hit her back. Not with an open palm, like she did, but with a fist to the face, making her head ring. It was a complete surprise for Naomi. Leaning against Alex's chest, she pushed him away and ran down the stairs. Rushing out of their entrance, Naomi walked briskly down the street, and Alex caught up with her. silently walking beside her, ignoring passers-by. Naomi, feeling her eyes welling up, screamed hysterically, "Don't come near me. Stay away and don't approach me ever again." "Naomi, forgive me. I didn't mean to. I didn't want this. But admit it. You're also to blame. And I got jealous. Stupid. It happens. I won't accompany you home now. I can see you're upset. I'll meet you after work tomorrow." "No, you won't," Naomi whispered. "It's over between us. And don't you dare come near me. Never. Do you hear? You're just very angry right now. I'm telling you, I didn't mean it. You drove me crazy. We'll talk tomorrow," Alex almost shouted after Naomi, who jumped off the bus step. No matter how hard Naomi tried not to cross paths with her parents at home, her mother still noticed a bruise on her daughter's face. "What's this?" the woman exclaimed, waving her hands. "Did Alex hit you? Let's go to the police immediately. We'll file a complaint against him." "I won't file any complaints, Mom. I'm ashamed. It's over between Alex and me." Naomi desperately wanted to believe it. She loathed Alex with all her heart, but unfortunately, he was not ready to leave her alone. He would ambush her after work, pleading for forgiveness. He promised that it would never happen again. Naomi noticed that when she refused him, involuntarily, Alex's hands clenched into fists. Spring gave way to summer. The lilac had almost faded, but still emitted its intoxicating fragrance, stirring Henry, who stood amid its dense bushes. He had trampled a spot in this thicket as he often stood here. The residents of the building nearby had started noticing his vigilance, as this lilac overlooked Naomi's house, where Henry couldn't stop his observations. Especially now, Henry had a faint hope. For the past 3 days, Naomi had been returning home alone. He knew it was foolish. Anything could happen. Naomi's new boyfriend could fall ill, could be away. But Henry hoped against their breakup. Today, he stood swaying slightly, having had a drink at the bar before coming here. Henry took a cigarette from the pack, intending to light it but didn't get a chance. He saw a familiar silhouette emerging from around the corner. Henry didn't even notice how his hand turned into a fist. Next to Naomi was her new boyfriend again. Although Henry squinted, everything was not quite as usual. Naomi was working a bit ahead at a brisk pace, and the guy seemed to be catching up with her, trying to explain something. Forgetting about caution, Henry peered out from behind the lilac bush, trying to see Naomi's face. Yes, she looked displeased. They probably had a quarrel. Naomi approached her house and reached for the gate, intending to open it. The guy following her grabbed her hand and abruptly turned her towards him. Henry turned purple with anger but continued watching. Naomi jerked, trying to free her hand. And then the unthinkable happened for Henry. That guy. He hit Naomi. He hit her. Henry didn't remember how he crossed the road, ignoring the honking car that almost hit him. His whole being was filled with rage as he pounced on this insolent guy who dared to touch his beloved. Henry started beating him. Naomi, not understanding anything yet, stood holding her cheek, which Alex had hit once again. She couldn't comprehend where Henry came from and what was happening. The girl was slightly dazed. Physically, Henry was much superior to Alex, so after a couple of blows, Alex was lying on the ground. Unfortunately, Naomi didn't know everything about her new boyfriend. His rough way of communicating wasn't just for show. It developed in prison, where Alex ended up at a very young age. Although he skillfully hid his criminal past from Naomi, some habits didn't disappear. And now, in Alex's pocket, there was a folding knife he never parted with. When Henry bent down to him, intending to grab him by the collar, lift him to his feet, and continue beating him, Alex's hand found that little knife in his pocket. Naomi screamed piercingly, seeing a red stain spreading across Henry's chest. Henry himself, lowering his head, looked at him in bewilderment. He didn't even have time to understand what had happened. Meanwhile, Alex, slightly limping, ran away down the street. Henry jerked, as if intending to run after him. But then his gaze dimmed. His vision lost its clarity, and Henry smoothly, as in slow motion, sank to the ground. Naomi, still screaming, tried to find her mobile phone in her bag to call an ambulance, but her fingers wouldn't cooperate. Responding to her daughter's cries, Naomi's mother rushed out of the gate, where she happened to be in the yard at the time. The woman couldn't get any coherent answer from her daughter about what had happened. Naomi just kept shouting, "Call an ambulance. Mom, call it quickly. Henry, my dear, don't die. I beg you, hold on. I love you. I love you. Stay with me." The ambulance arrived only half an hour later. By that time, Henry was not sitting but lying on the ground, unconscious. His head rested on Naomi's knees as she wept. The moment they loaded Henry onto the stretcher, Naomi jumped into the ambulance with him. Throughout the journey, she sat beside him, stroking his head, straightening those familiar, unruly locks. To her, it seemed like if Henry died now, she would die right after him. She pleaded incessantly with the paramedic to save the life of her beloved. When they finally reached the hospital, Henry was immediately taken to the operating room, and Naomi ran around the corridor, wringing her hands. The surgery didn't last long, but for Naomi, it felt endless. The young doctor who came out turned out to be very young. He addressed the nurse sitting in reception. "Any relatives of Henry's here?" "It's me. I'm here." "What's happening to him?" Naomi exclaimed. "Are you his wife?" the doctor asked, turning to the girl. Naomi hesitated. "No, I'm not his wife. I'm his girlfriend." "Strange. The guy has a wedding ring on his finger. Hasn't his wife arrived yet?" Without paying any more attention to Naomi, the doctor asked the nurse again. "I don't know," she replied, bewildered. "We didn't inform anyone. See that girl over there? She came with the patient in their ambulance. I thought she was his wife. Tell me, please, what's happening with him? It's crucial for me to know. Is Henry alive?" "Yes, your Henry is alive," the doctor replied, taking off his surgical cap. "The wound is not deep. Vital organs are not affected. He just lost a lot of blood, but that's replenishable. Most likely, we'll transfer him to a regular ward tomorrow. So, don't worry. Your friend will be fine." The doctor turned to the nurse. "But you called the police, I hope?" "Obviously, this wound is criminal. The police were called." The nurse quickly nodded. "I did that." Naomi was no longer interested in this conversation. She smiled with relief, walked over to the opposite wall, and sat on the couch there. "Everything will be okay with Henry," she rejoiced. "But as for Alex, let him go to jail for what he did." She stayed to wait for the police to arrive and provide her statement. Layla entered the hospital building with a displeased expression. Today, she had planned to go for a manicure, but instead, she found herself wandering through hospital corridors, permeated with the scent of medicine and aging. Layla couldn't stand being in such places. She hadn't intended to visit her husband in the hospital until Albert called, inquiring about their son's condition. Layla had to explain that she simply hadn't had the time to visit Henry yet. After that, reluctantly, she made her way to the hospital. The nurse at the station informed her about the ward where her husband was, and Layla, pinching her nose in distaste, headed there. In the room, she found her husband lying on the bed, with an unremarkable girl sitting beside him. This girl was holding Henry's hand. Layla immediately understood Naomi had decided to forgive Henry. "Layla, this is Naomi, my girlfriend. You know her," Henry introduced. "I don't know anything, and I don't want to know," Layla said. "Quickly release my husband's hand and get out of this room." "Layla, don't you dare talk to Naomi like that. You know everything. I warned you that I love her. As soon as I leave the hospital, we'll get divorced." "Did you hear me correctly? Get out of the room. I came to see my husband." "I leave," she said, turning to Henry. "You two really need to talk. Don't worry, I'll come back later." Once Naomi closed the door behind her, Layla confronted her husband. "What do you mean by getting divorced? Have you forgotten our agreement? I have no intention of divorcing you. You don't understand. Naomi is I don't care," interrupted Henry's wife. "I don't care about your affairs at all. Have you not realized that? Sneak around with your Naomi quietly, and don't mention divorce. That's not going to happen." He raised himself again on the bed, paying no attention to the pain. "I won't secretly date Naomi. We'll be together, and we'll get married, as planned. I will divorce you anyway. And don't you dare talk to Naomi in that tone again." "Naomi, Naomi," repeating like a parrot. "You're a fool who climbed out of the bottom. Anyone else would be happy, but you're too stupid to appreciate it. Your place is being a driver, not in the company of your father." Having said this, Layla turned sharply, intending to leave. In the door of the room, she collided with the out-of-breath Sandra. Without deigning to greet her mother-in-law, the girl walked away. Just outside the hospital, she called Albert. "I need to talk to you seriously. Where can we meet?" "I'm at home right now. You can come over." Albert, lounging comfortably in a chair in the living room, watched with a smirk as the indignant Layla, waving her hands, vented her anger on Henry. However, as soon as Albert heard that his son had reconciled with Naomi and was planning to get a divorce, his facial expression changed. "He reconciled with Naomi?" Albert frowned, asking again, "Are you sure? I just saw them together in the hospital room, and he told me he'd file for divorce right after being discharged." "Well, this is bad, very bad." Albert shook his head. "I already have some issues with your father. And if Henry divorces me, it will be bad for everyone. Father will first withdraw all his assets from your project. That's one thing. Also, you don't know my father well. He is very vindictive and forgives no one. It's better not to anger him. In this case, he will direct all his anger right at you." "Yes, I know about David's vindictiveness." Albert waved his hand. "Henry is a fool. What a fool he is. Why doesn't he enjoy his wealth? I've already been quite disappointed in my son lately. How many times I tried to persuade him to talk to his father about our business. Your father holds quite conservative views, fears taking risks in business, and that's a mistake. What I want to tell you, Layla, is not to give him the opportunity to divorce you. As I understand, it's not in your interest either." "Yes, you understand everything correctly. I don't want to go back to my father's house. Finally, I broke free from his hyper-control. And now this. Moreover, he will start looking for a husband for me again. I can't take it anymore. Everything suited me in our relationship with Henry. I even suggested to him to date his Naomi, but not to divorce me. And he rejected my proposal." Albert gazed thoughtfully at Layla. He had never really pondered her character before. Now she surprised him with her statements. How could a woman be so indifferent to her husband's infidelity? Suddenly, Albert asked, "Layla, how do you feel about not entirely legal deals? You're somewhat aware of the essence of our project, right? You know what became a stumbling block between your father and me. How would you handle it?" "I know very little, but my father told me that what you want to pull off is illegal. It doesn't bother you a bit, and it doesn't bother me either. I'm not like my father. With our money, what laws can there be? I might have tried to convince Dad to take the risk with you, but what's the point now? Especially now that Henry is divorcing me." Albert rose from his chair, and an unfamiliar gleam lit up Layla's eyes. This sparkle, from his slightly squinted eyes, dazzled the girl as Albert, with the predator's agile stride, approached her and passionately began to kiss her, embracing her waist. Layla had never been so captivated by a man in her life as she suddenly was by Albert. He wasn't yet 46, and he was quite attractive. Moreover, he knew what he wanted. leading a tough life. In this, their views on life coincided. Layla was far from an inexperienced girl. There were many men in her life, and she, too, had been unfaithful to Henry, but did so intelligently. Layla plunged into this relationship headlong. While Henry was in the hospital, she spent every night with Albert, coming to him in the evenings without any reservations. One morning, while looking at Albert lying next to her in bed and tracing her finger along his chest, Layla said thoughtfully, "Father should have married me to you, not Henry. David would never have married you to me. I'm too old, just 5 years younger than him." "Oh, you're wrong about him. I think Dad was ready to marry me off to anyone with money. And then Henry showed up. You even recommended him. By the way, are you aware that he's being discharged from the hospital today? Let's tell him that we're together now, and I'll file for divorce myself. Then we can live together, and I don't care what my father does." "Don't you dare, Layla. You shouldn't say anything to Henry. Don't even give a hint that there's something between us." "Why not? You said yourself that you're disappointed in your son, that he's no longer needed by you. And that's right. You're still young. I never thought I'd say this, but do you want me to have a child for you?" "Maybe, Layla. Anything is possible. Maybe you will. But not now. If we reveal our connection now, there will be a scandal. David will go mad. Enough already of caring about my father. I told you I won't go back to his house. For the first time in my life, I don't care about his opinion, but I do." Albert cut her off. "You can't even imagine what our joint project, which we started with your father, means to me. I invested half of my money in it, and now it's stalled. All we need is his signature on the documents, and he's stubborn illegal. Illegal. If I followed the laws my whole life, I wouldn't have anything now. Listen, Layla, we need a little more time. We need to convince your father to act more decisively and sign the documents. After that signature, it won't matter anymore. The process can't be stopped, and the money can't be withdrawn from the deal. Then you can divorce Henry." Layla got out of bed and threw on a robe. She felt offended that Albert prioritized their project over their relationship. At this point, she didn't care about her father's opinion or the project. She just wanted to be with Albert. "I can wait, of course," she said, "but Henry is determined. During my only visit to him in the hospital, he told me he would file for divorce as soon as he was discharged. And he's leaving today." "I understand." Albert also got up from the bed and started dressing. "Call me when Henry arrives home, and somehow delay him until I get there. I'll try to talk to him, but please, don't let him sense anything between us. Otherwise, he won't listen. Just try to keep Henry there until I arrive." However, on that day, Henry never showed up at the cottage where he lived with Layla. After being discharged from the hospital, he went to his mother's house and stayed there until evening, waiting for Naomi to finish work. Henry slipped out of his mother's apartment an hour before Naomi's workday ended. He lingered near the building, waiting for Naomi to come out of her office. And there she was. A joyful smile lit up her face. "You're already here. I told you not to come. You shouldn't move too much. You've just been discharged from the hospital. You need rest." "Even more reason for me to come. I feel at peace only when you're around." Henry took Naomi's hand, and they strolled down the street slowly. "Have you seen her? Well, your wife?" Naomi asked hesitantly. "No, I haven't. From the hospital. I went to my mom's place. I'll spend the night there too. I'll go to Leela's tomorrow morning to pick up my things. Then I'll file for divorce, right tomorrow. Do you believe me, Naomi? I'm getting divorced." "Yes, I believe you," Naomi laughed. "I always believed and never doubted you, unlike me," Henry concluded grimly. "I know what you mean." "No, I don't mean that." Naomi became serious. "Let's close this chapter and start fresh. No more reproaches and shadows of the past. Just Please, never doubt me again. I won't betray you." At the gate of Naomi's house, her mother was waiting, arms folded across her chest. Though Alex had been arrested, a trial awaited him, and after the recent events, the woman was uneasy. Every day she met her daughter outside the house. "Oh, here come my dear ones," Monica said upon seeing Henry, walking hand in hand with her daughter. "Did they discharge you from the hospital?" "No one bothers to ask me, but I'll express my opinion. Just try to hurt my daughter again. Do you hear, Henry? I'll personally beat you later. And, by the way, you're married. Are you planning to get divorced?" "I am planning to. Directly tomorrow. Filing for divorce," Henry answered with a smile. "I swear to you, Monica, I will never hurt Naomi again. She is the most precious thing in my life." The next morning, Henry went to see his wife. He wasn't eager to meet Layla, who, as he suspected, was still asleep. After a brief greeting, Henry began packing his things. Layla didn't interfere. She immediately jumped out of bed, grabbed her phone from the bedside table, and rushed into the bathroom. When Henry had gathered everything he needed and was about to leave the cottage, Layla called to him from the dining room. "Henry, come in, please. Let's talk calmly, like civilized people. Are you absolutely sure we need to get divorced right now? Why are you frozen like that? Sit down, have coffee with me. I won't bite." Henry sat at the table and mechanically took a cup of coffee in his hands. Layla engaged him in conversation as best she could until Albert entered the dining room. "Father, why are you here? Sit down." Albert waved his hand at his son. "I came to talk to you. Layla, may I have coffee too?" He turned to the girl. "Yes, of course." Layla left the dining room. "Judging by your appearance, Father, you already know. I'm getting a divorce from Layla. If you're going to talk me out of it, it's useless. I've already understood that it's useless. And you don't care that you're jeopardizing our joint project. You were also involved in developing the project. It seems that for you, emotions are more important than business. If you didn't look so much like me externally, I would doubt whether you're really my son." Henry, in annoyance, stood up. "Here's what I'll tell you, Father. I'm not happy about our relation either. I don't intend to live like you, putting money above everything, destroying people's lives for the sake of it. Sorry, it's not for me. I'm filing for divorce from Layla today, and I won't work in the company anymore. I don't want that." Albert raised his voice. However, seeing that sternness wouldn't achieve anything, he decided to change tactics. "Sit down, please," he said more gently. "I don't want you to leave the company. You can work in your previous position with the same salary. We won't have much interaction. Live with your Naomi. Do what you want. But I have one condition." "No, I expressed it incorrectly. Not a condition, a request. Do you think I haven't done enough for you financially? Am I not allowed to ask?" "Speak, Father. What do you want?" "In a few days, it's David's birthday." "Layla, when exactly is your father's birthday?" Albert asked the girl, who was entering the dining room with a cup of coffee for him. "In 3 days," Layla answered, placing the cup in front of the man and smiling at him provocatively, as she stood with her back to Henry. "So, Henry, it turns out that in 3 days, it's David's birthday. He plans to celebrate it at his country house. Naturally, we're all invited. I'm asking you, let's not publicize the divorce before that time. Before David, you and Layla will try to portray a happy married couple. David will drink, loosen up, and the 3 of us will try to convince him to sign the documents. The case will go smoothly, I'm sure, and none of us will lose the money already invested. I'm not asking for anything supernatural from you, just 3 days. After the papers are signed, it will be too late to back out. Then you can get divorced from Layla. Please, Henry." The young man pondered. His father didn't ask for much, it seemed. Just a small delay. And, in a way, the man was right. Henry had received a lot from him, especially in financial terms, despite their attempts to disrupt his personal life. Perhaps it wasn't malicious, just Albert's perception of the right order of things. At the moment, Henry was happy and ready to forgive his father's past transgressions. Okay, I agree. I'll be at Mr. Lila's father's birthday party. I'll try to portray a happy married couple with her, as you're asking. But that's it. After that, I'm getting a divorce. Henry kept his word, and 3 days later, he and Layla arrived at David's country house. Despite staying close to Layla the whole evening, pretending to be a caring spouse, Henry didn't notice that his wife couldn't take her eyes off Albert, eyes burning with passion. However, David caught one of those looks and became wary. After consuming a considerable amount of alcohol, he dismissed the suspicion as his imagination. Contrary to Henry's hopes, the guests dispersed only late at night. Only he and Layla, along with Albert and the host, remained in the house. At this point, Albert began his pressure on David. He persuaded him, outlined the prospects of expected profits, and said that if the plan failed, and it would certainly succeed, they could provide for both Henry and Layla and their future grandchildren for the rest of their lives. The profit promised to be enormous. Henry remained silent. His presence was all that was required. Unexpectedly, Layla joined in the persuasions. She fervently tried to convince her father, astonishing David. The homeowner was drunk, and he was in a good mood. Therefore, he gave in. Okay, you've convinced me, relatives. Although I repeat, I've never broken the law in my life. And what we're about to do clearly smells like a crime. But I'll take the risk. Albert skillfully pulled out the documents and instantly spread them on the table in front of David. Sign right now. You brought documents to my celebration. You're something else. Sign, I say. Albert pushed the papers towards David, pretending to smile. We'll start acting first thing in the morning. Our project has been frozen for a long time. There's no further delay. I don't back down from my words. David hiccuped drunkenly and took a pen in his hands. The man signed all the papers that Albert carefully placed in front of him. Music still played in the house, and Henry, sitting next to Layla, didn't immediately hear the phone ringing in his pocket. Surprised by who could be calling so late, he took it out and got scared when he saw the caller ID. Yes, Mom. What happened? He shouted into the phone. Son, something's not right with me. My blood pressure shot up. It's never happened before. I called an ambulance. Can't you come? Sandra said weakly. Henry jumped up, rushed to the exit, shouting on the way that his mom wasn't feeling well, and he needed to leave urgently. A good son. David chuckled. Look how he's running to his mom. It speaks positively of him, as if remembering something. David stood up, trying to work fast. He followed Henry, stepping into the vast courtyard. He shouted at his son, who was getting into his car. Wait, you've been drinking. Let my driver take you. Well, if that's possible, let's use your driver. Just make it quick. Meanwhile, in the living room, Layla and Albert were left alone. So, we won. Layla smiled. Everything worked out. Now we'll divorce Henry, and I can be with you. Yes, of course, Albert replied absent-mindedly. Layla approached Albert, sat on his lap, wrapped her arms around him, and started kissing him. Albert didn't like it. He tried to push her away but couldn't. David returned to the room, his benevolent expression instantly turning into an angry one as soon as he saw his daughter on Albert's lap. Layla, as if stung, jumped off Albert's lap. Dad, you've got it all wrong. She began to justify herself in response to David's angry exclamation. Albert got something in his eye, and I was helping him get it out. In his eye. Don't make a fool out of me. David yelled so loudly that his shouts drowned out the music playing in the depth of the house. What are you two up to? Albert, I thought you were normal. How could you? She's your son's wife. Dad, listen to me. Layla tried to speak confidently, but her voice sounded like a scared mouse squeak. My marriage to Henry was a mistake. I love Albert, and I'll live with him after the divorce. What? Roared David. What nonsense are you talking? Planning to make a mockery of me in front of the whole town. First, you lived with my son, and now with his old man. And where are you going, Albert? Aren't you ashamed? We're almost the same age. Moreover, Layla is your son's fiancée. It's disgusting. It's such filth. If I knew what kind of person you are, I would never have gotten involved with your family. You heard what your daughter said, David. She's getting a divorce from my son. And yes, I'm ready to marry her afterward. As for age, well, love knows no age. Albert tried to joke. What nonsense are you talking about, idiot? Who will allow you to marry my daughter? Consider all our agreements with you terminated from this moment. I'll withdraw all my investments from the business. I don't want to know you anymore. Too late. Albert smirked. You signed the documents. It's impossible to withdraw the money. Where are these documents? David looked around. You wouldn't have had time to take them out of the room. I'll destroy them right now. Both men noticed the folder with documents lying lonely on the edge of the table simultaneously, and they both rushed towards it. Albert grabbed the folder first, and David tried to snatch it. David, listen to me. Albert tried to persuade him, not letting go of the documents. You're a businessman, and business is business. David's shouts only fueled Albert's anger more and more, but he couldn't snatch the folder from Albert. Therefore, unable to contain his rage, the man punched Albert in the face, taking advantage of the latter's confusion, and seized the folder. What happened next happened in a matter of seconds, but in Leela's eyes, the image of Albert swinging a heavy ashtray and hitting her father on the head froze forever. David fell to the floor, and Albert, as if in bewilderment, stared at the ashtray in his hand. He was going to tear up the papers. Going to tear up. Albert repeated like a broken record. Well, what are you standing there for? He's your father. See what's happening with him. Is he alive? No. No pulse. She exclaimed after a few seconds. Maybe I'm mistaken. I don't understand. Albert, check for yourself. Inspecting the body, Albert confirmed that David was dead. This wasn't the first time Albert had taken a life. The road to wealth was tough, and the man didn't shy away from anything. But back then, it happened differently. Albert didn't act with his own hands. But now it was terrifying because there was a witness, and that witness was the daughter of the deceased. Layla, Albert said insinuatingly to the hysterical girl. You saw it, didn't you? He attacked me first. I was just defending myself. I didn't want this. You have to think for yourself. Imagine if he would have torn the documents, locked you up at home. How would you have lived with him after what he saw? What do we do now? They'll send you to prison. Or maybe not. Maybe it wasn't me who did it. Then who? Layla asked hopefully, starting to understand something. Well, let's suppose it was Henry. Your father went out to see him off into the yard and never came back. And we spent this whole time in the living room together. We have each other's alibi. Are you ready to go along with this? I'm ready. Layla answered, slowly getting up. But how, Henry? He's your son, you know. Albert smirked, now confident that everything would work out. I'm not that attached to him. And if we have to choose who between us will go to jail, him or me, I will definitely choose not myself. Don't worry, Layla. As you said, we'll have children together. Tell me what to do, Layla asked almost calmly. All right. First, let's figure out where the cameras are in the house. We need to erase the recordings. Second, who's in the house right now? Besides us, there's only the maid in the house. There's also the driver, but he sleeps in the servants' quarters. Clear. Albert's brain worked like clockwork. calculating all possibilities. About half an hour later, Layla called the maid into the living room. When the woman entered, she saw the homeowner's daughter sitting next to her father-in-law, chatting amiably. "Teresa," Layla addressed the housekeeper, "here in Dad's bar. The brandy ran out, and Albert only drinks that today. But Dad disappeared somewhere. He went into the yard to see off my husband and vanished. Please find him. Albert is getting really bored without him." Layla and Albert tensely waited for the housekeeper to return to the room, and when she did, she was trembling and frightened. "He's there." She vaguely pointed towards the door. "There, in the yard. David is lying on the ground. He seems not to be breathing." "What nonsense are you talking?" Layla exclaimed overly dramatically. "Where is he? Show us." When the police arrived at David's country house, dawn was breaking outside. Layla was in the living room. "I'm telling you again," she screamed. "Dad went out to see off my husband." They argued, and then Dad was nowhere to be found. "We thought they were just talking." "Leave the girl alone already," Albert said, noticing that Layla was on the verge of breaking down again. "Can't you see how hard it is for her? Her father has just passed away. Let me tell you once again. We were all sitting in the living room. Then Henry decided to leave, and David rushed out after him. They argued about Henry wanting to divorce Layla. David strongly disagreed. Of course, Layla and I weren't worried at first. We thought they had something to discuss. Then, when David didn't return for quite some time, we called the maid to ask her to call him in from the yard. She found David. "So, you discovered the body." The police officer turned to the housekeeper, who was sitting stiff as a board, with a serious, focused expression on her face. "Yes, it was me," replied the middle-aged woman. "I went out into the yard, and at first, I didn't see David. I went to look for him in the part of the yard where guests usually park their cars, and saw their owner lying on the ground." "So, you think David was killed by your son?" "What are you talking about?" Albert raised his voice with feigned indignation. "How can I accuse my own son? First, figure out what happened to David. Maybe he felt unwell, maybe a heart attack. Unlikely. Even at a glance, it's evident that the man has a fractured skull. And you claim that your son was arguing with the deceased. I'm telling you again, you should first figure things out." Henry was still sleeping at his mother's apartment when the police rang the doorbell. Sandra shouted and demanded explanations, seeing her son being handcuffed. But they took him away without explaining anything to her. The barely awake guy didn't understand what was happening at all. When they brought Henry to the police station, they led him into an interrogation room and left him alone there. And when the investigator finally entered, his first question was, "Now, tell me, how did you hit David?" "What do you mean hit? What happened to David? What's going on?" "Of course, something happened. You killed him. Because of your disagreements." "How did I kill him?" "David was killed." "What disagreements?" "We had no disagreements with my stepfather." "Oh, stop pretending. You were planning to divorce his daughter. You got yourself a new girlfriend. And your wife claims that while you were in the hospital, she couldn't come to see you because she kept running into your new girlfriend there. We called the hospital, and your wife's words were confirmed. So, I hope you won't dispute that. Were you planning to get a divorce?" "Let's say I was planning to, but my stepfather didn't know about it." "Then tell me what happened in the yard of his country house when he followed you outside." "My stepfather went out to see me off, and I left." "That's it. You left, and he was left lying in the yard, dead, with a fractured skull. Your father and wife were in the house at that time. They were together the whole time. But no one can confirm your words." "What do you mean no one can confirm? What about the driver?" "What driver?" The investigator was surprised. "No one mentioned a driver until now." "The driver, my stepfather's driver," said Henry. "David called him from the servants' quarters to come to the yard and drive my car. The driver came out, and we left together. When we were leaving the yard, we saw David returning to the house. Is that so? The investigator pondered, rubbing his forehead. Well, if everything is as you say, it changes the case radically. Okay, I'll find this driver. Investigator Felix stepped out of the interrogation room, instructing to take the guy to the isolation ward. He needed some time to think. Something didn't add up in Albert's words. He clearly didn't know about the driver who brought his son home. And the guy, it seemed, wasn't lying. There was a scent of money in the air. A very substantial amount. Felix realized it instantly when Henry mentioned the driver. The investigator had been working for many years, and money was always tight. Cases where he could benefit were rare. Besides, his wife was nagging him about the unfinished country house. Instead of ordering to find David's driver, Felix went straight to Albert. Albert understood that the investigator didn't come for a casual chat and invited him to his office for a conversation. Albert, your statement that Henry was the last one to see David is not confirmed. It turns out there's a witness. What witness? Albert frowned. Who? Well, I don't know. Felix pretended to ponder, running his finger along the edge of Albert's desk. Can I tell you? It's an investigation secret. You know, how much money do you need? Albert bluntly asked. Felix smiled, took a piece of paper from the folder on his lap, and wrote down a sum. Quickly showing it to Albert, he tucked the note into his pocket. If this witness confirms your son's words, all charges against the boy will be dropped immediately, and he'll have to be released. Then we'll have to look for new suspects. I understand, Albert said. Wait here. He left their office for the adjacent room where he had a secret safe. Retrieving several stacks of cash from there, he returned to Felix and, with a loud slap, laid the money out in front of him. Swiftly, the investigator collected the money into his folder. Albert, I'll tell you in confidence. David went after your son not to argue, but to offer his driver since your son was drunk. This driver took Henry home, and they saw David returning to the house. When are you planning to talk to this driver? Tomorrow morning. Every hour spent in the isolation ward seemed endless to Henry. It was hard for him. It didn't make sense in his mind that David had been killed. Even more incomprehensible was the fact that they were trying to accuse him. Henry didn't want to think about who might have actually done it. Perhaps a robber who infiltrated the house. It didn't matter. He would think about it later. Now the main thing was to get out of here. Why were they keeping him here for so long? Is it really that difficult to find the driver? They took away his phone. His mom is nervous, and Naomi is probably worried too. And there was no way to talk to them and reassure them. Time dragged on endlessly. And when evening came, the guy realized he would probably have to spend the night here. The hard cot was uncomfortable, and Henry couldn't close his eyes. Troubling thoughts bothered him. One comforting thing was that once the driver was found, all suspicions against him would be lifted. It was horrifying to think that they considered him a murderer. Take me to the investigator. I want to talk to him. The guy shouted. Have a seat. The investigator said. He's David's driver in front of you. The only driver. Did he drive you home last night? Well, yes, him. Of course, him. Henry smiled. The guy was happy about their impending freedom. Do you confirm the accused's words? Did you drive his car? No. I slept in the staff house all night. No one disturbed me. Neither David nor him. The driver nodded towards Henry. I didn't see anyone. What? Henry shouted. Remember, you got behind the wheel. We talked the whole way. I was worried about how you would get back, and you said you'd manage. It's not a problem for you. Why are you lying now? I'm not lying. The man shrugged, his face remaining impassive. I'm telling the truth. I slept all night. Henry couldn't wrap his head around how the driver could lie so blatantly while looking him in the eye. The guy was about to start shouting again, but the investigator, seeing this, waved his hands. All right. It's clear. You're free. Witness. He addressed the driver. You can go. Why did you do that, kid? The investigator shook his head. Why make up such a silly alibi for yourself? Did you think we wouldn't ask the driver? Your lies only worsened the situation for you. You could have told the truth. Think about it carefully. I don't need you to confess openly. Albert was at work. Despite everything that happened, business came first, as always. David was gone. So what? He managed to sign the documents. So, everything that is not done is for the better. Albert was honest enough to admit to himself that David's absence was only beneficial for him. However, everything happened very awkwardly. Now he had to spend money, first to the investigator, then to the driver. But these were trifles compared to what happened right in front of Layla. This was very bad. The girl was emotionally unstable, and she was dangerous for Albert. Although now, while she was in love with him, she did everything he said. Soon she would inherit all of David's fortune, and then, it seemed he would have to marry her after all. A wealthy heiress, and besides, now he always needed to keep her in sight. As for Henry, Albert frowned. It was a pity, of course, that everything turned out this way. But his son didn't leave him a choice. If he were a different person and agreed to live the way Albert wanted, maybe things would be different. Now Albert sighed. Well, I never had a son before. Let's consider that I never found him. The man was dealing with paperwork when the housekeeper called him from the house. Albert, there's some woman waiting for you. I explained to her that you're not home, but she won't leave. She's making a lot of noise. What woman? Did she introduce herself? She says she's Henry's mom. Okay, I understand. Tell her I'll be there soon, and ask her not to make a scene. The woman refused to enter Albert's house, suggesting they took right on the street. Reluctant to air their issues in front of neighbors, Albert barely persuaded Sandra to at least sit in the car. Once seated in the passenger seat, she began speaking in an elevated tone. I went to the investigator, and he told me what they're accusing Henry of. Explain to me, Albert. How is this possible? How? I don't understand it myself. Why would Henry need to kill his father-in-law? Shut up and stop talking nonsense. He couldn't have killed anyone. I think you know that yourself. Besides, when he arrived last night, he smelled of alcohol. I asked how he got behind the wheel, and Henry told me that his father-in-law's driver brought him, but the driver denies it. Albert said quietly. How does he deny it? Sandra blinked. Why would he deny it? Why would the driver lie? She murmured in thought. Unless someone paid him. And who could do that? Only you. Why did you need this? Did you kill David? And are you trying to pin it on your son? Without giving Albert a chance to respond, the woman angrily punched him in the shoulder. Shut up. I know what you want to say. You were cruel even in your youth. I just didn't notice it. But now I see through you. You lured your son with money, and when he refused to live by your rules, he became immediately useless to you, didn't he? And now you're planning to hang your sins on him. It won't happen. I won't let my son be imprisoned. I'd rather you go and confess everything. If they put Henry away, I'll kill you myself. I can. Sandra arranged to meet with the lawyer at one of the city cafes. She arrived an hour earlier than the scheduled meeting, sitting on pins and needles, knowing that at that moment, the attorney was meeting with her son in prison. How much she wanted to see Henry, to encourage him. But Sandra was not allowed a visit with her son. When the lawyer appeared, Sandra was initially relieved, but seeing the grim expression on the man's face, she slumped. Apparently, things were bad. How is Henry? Did you see him? Have you talked to him? The woman bombarded the attorney with questions as he approached the table, not waiting for him to sit down. He's okay. I talked to him. He's strong and determined to fight, to prove his innocence. The lawyer assured her. Sandra smiled slightly at the good news, but the attorney didn't allow her to revel in it. Unfortunately, those are all the good news. Everything else is very, very bad. They conducted an inspection of your son's car, and what? Sandra interrupted the man. Did they find the fingerprints of David's driver? The one who drove Henry home? No fingerprints of the driver were found, nor were your son's. The steering wheel and the driver's door are absolutely clean, as if someone intentionally wiped them. But why would Henry do that? Sandra exclaimed. That is indeed a big question. And that's not all the bad news. Under the driver's seat, an ashtray was discovered. An examination proved that this ashtray was the murder weapon used on David. How is that possible? Where did it come from? Could Albert be so vile? Albert is a respected person in the town. Besides, and this is not insignificant, he's Henry's father. And, you know, it's not my prerogative to make accusations. I'm here only to defend Henry. And let me tell you, I believe in the boy's innocence. I'll make every effort to get him out. Although, I feel the chances are slim. Investigator Felix is working very hard. Most likely, this case will be lost, which is a great pity. In my practice, lost cases can be counted on the fingers of one hand. Do you hear yourself? You're worried about your reputation, and my son's fate is at stake. He's a very young guy, and he's innocent. For you, it's just a case. But for him, it's a ruined life. I'm telling you, I'll make every effort. But unfortunately, I'm not all-powerful. I want to give you one piece of advice. David's funeral is tomorrow. Are you planning to attend? No, Sandra shrugged. Who would want to see me there? After all, I'm considered the mother of the murderer. I strongly advise you to go. You may not know this, but David's brother has arrived in town. With considerable, I must say, money and connections. He has already talked to investigator Felix, who convinced him of Henry's guilt. So now he also wants your son to be imprisoned. Talk to him. Maybe you can sow doubt in him, and he will start digging into this case himself. That's when Henry will have a real chance. Of course, Sandra heeded the lawyer's advice and attended David's funeral the next day. Naomi accompanied her, unable to stay away. Although she understood that Layla would find it unpleasant to see her, Sandra recognized David's brother immediately. However, getting close to this stern man seemed impossible. There were always many people around him, and Naomi, in particular, always stood behind Sandra, avoiding attention. During the farewell ceremony, Layla broke into tears, occasionally searching for Albert with her eyes, who tried to stay nearby. David's brother shed no tears. He stood straight as a board, with a stone-faced expression, only supporting his sobbing niece by gently hugging her shoulders. He also delivered the farewell speech, as Layla pretended to be unable to cope with grief. Sandra shuddered upon hearing the last words of that speech. I will make every effort to ensure that the guilty party in my brother's death receives the most severe punishment. As the funeral neared its end, Sandra and Naomi never got the chance to speak with David's brother. When people began dispersing from the cemetery, Sandra held on to a faint hope. However, she saw David's brother heading towards the car with Layla. Sandra hurried forward. Donald. Hello. She called out to the man getting into the huge black car, trying not to reveal her anxiety in her voice. Who are you? I don't know you. Donald shot her a sharp look. I'm Sandra, Henry's mom. He's currently being accused. I understand. I have nothing to discuss with you, the man said, starting to sit in the car. Listen, give me 5 minutes. You're making a mistake. The real killer of your brother will be working free, enjoying life. Get in the car, the man said. Sandra circled the car and got in from the other side. I'm listening carefully if you really have something to say. I knew you couldn't say anything concrete. It's all just emotions. He's your son, and you're sure he didn't do it. But in fact, all the evidence is against Henry. The murder weapon was found in his car, Donald said, sternly looking at Sandra. That's the point. Think about it. The murder weapon is an ashtray. Where would Henry get it in his yard? Do you think he brought it from home, planning to kill his father-in-law? That sounds absurd. Even Layla claims their quarrel was spontaneous. And fingerprints. Why would Henry wipe the fingerprints in his own car? There were fingerprints on David's driver's seat, which needed to be erased, but not Henry's. It's absolutely obvious that someone planted the ashtray, wiped the prints, and the driver was either bribed or threatened. Maybe both. Who do you think did it? Are you trying to accuse someone specific? Yes, I am. Albert. I'm almost certain he killed your brother, and he's ready to pin it all on his own son. You're throwing serious accusations around so easily. Besides, Albert is a respected man. Yes, I know. Moreover, Albert has a lot of money. He could easily bribe the driver and plant evidence against Henry. No. As you put it, it's nonsense. Why would Albert kill my brother? They were family. And, as far as I know, they had good relations. They were in business together. And most importantly, my niece claims she was with Albert the entire time. Why would she lie? She won't cover up her father's murderer. Henry is her husband, but she says it was him. So, what you're saying is foolish. I shouldn't have agreed to talk to you. Get out of the car. What if I get evidence? Evidence that the case against my son is fabricated. Will you listen to me then? Well, if there is evidence, then perhaps I will listen. But only on the condition that it's genuinely solid evidence, not your conjectures. The man turned to the security guard sitting in front, next to the driver. Give this woman my business card. Sandra was already getting out of the car, and he added, nodding, solid evidence. Did you hear that, Sandra? Call me only if there are solid evidence. The car pulled away, leaving a dusty trail on the gravel road of the cemetery. Naomi hurried over to Sandra. So, did he believe you? No, Naomi, he didn't. But what's there to believe? You and I know for sure that Henry didn't kill anyone. This man needs evidence. Look, Sandra showed Naomi the business card. He said if there's evidence, then we can call him. But only in that case. But where will we get this evidence? The girl blinked. I recently told Albert that I would do everything, but I won't let them imprison my son. We must find something. Albert couldn't have thought of everything. He missed something. The next day, a taxi, meandering through the private sector on the outskirts of the city, stopped near a small but well-kept house. Sandra and Naomi got out of the car. They knocked on the window, and a woman came out. Teresa. Sandra asked her, "Do you work as a maid in David's country house?" "Yes, that's me." "And who are you?" "If anything, the police have already questioned me. I've told them everything." "We're not from the police. I'm Henry's mom." "Why did you come to me?" "I've said many times I didn't see or hear anything. I was in the kitchen. I don't know if Henry and David argued or not." "What do you want from me?" "It can't be that you heard nothing," exclaimed Naomi. "If there were arguments, it was loud. Are you deaf?" "Deaf and blind. I've already told you everything, and I'm not going to repeat it. Leave before your taxi leaves." The woman snapped, unexpectedly for everyone. Sandra then knelt right on the muddy path, raised her eyes to Teresa, and begged, "I'm begging you. I see that you know something. I'm a mother, and I'm ready for anything for the sake of my son. Do you have children or grandchildren? What if something like this happened to them, and everyone around stayed silent, like you are now? Help me." "What are you doing?" The woman spoke tearfully. "Do you think I don't understand you? I have a daughter and 2 grandchildren, and I understand you perfectly. But for their sake, I can't say anything. For their safety. I've worked in the house for many years. I know such people not by hearsay." "You're afraid of Albert," Sandra asserted. "I know. But what if I tell you there's someone much more powerful than Albert? And he can protect you if you start telling the truth. He's eager to find the real killer. Are you talking about Donald? Yes, I know him. Okay, let's go inside. I'll tell you. Yes, I heard their argument. The argument took place in the living room after Henry left. Albert and David were arguing loudly. I didn't understand the cause, but towards the end, it seemed they couldn't share some documents. I can't say for sure. The shouts were loud, especially David's. Then everything suddenly quieted down. That's all I know, but I can't tell the investigator. You understand, I'm afraid. You worry about your son, and I worry about my daughter. She doesn't work, sits with the grandchildren, and if something happens to me, there'll be no one to help her. What if we go to Donald with your story? He can protect you. We'll tell him that you're afraid, that you need protection. But just... Sandra hesitated for a moment, turning to Naomi. What do you think, Naomi? Is this enough evidence for Donald? I don't know. Teresa says she didn't see anything, only heard the argument. And against Henry, there's an ashtray in his car. Okay. Teresa decided. I'll say something else. On the eve of his birthday, David installed additional cameras in the house. Layla didn't know about them. Their installation wasn't completed yet. They recorded, but the transmission to the computer wasn't set up. Somehow it turned out strangely that the recordings from those cameras, which have been in the house for a long time, were erased. That's what I think. Although Layla claims that there was no recording that day to avoid disturbing the guests. But the new cameras definitely recorded, and one of them is installed right in the living room. Donald watched the footage from the surveillance camera installed in the living room of his brother's country house, and he grimaced with disgust. It was repulsive for him to see his niece kneel down to Albert and engage in a passionate embrace. As the recording showed David bursting into the room and starting a scene, Donald tensed. The camera captured the scene silently, but sound wasn't needed. From David's outraged gestures and expressions, everything was clear. It was difficult for Donald to watch the moment of his brother's murder, but he kept his gaze fixed on the screen. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead when he witnessed the niece assisting the killer of her own father. They, together with Albert, dragged the body into the yard and erased traces of the crime in the room. Just a few hours ago, Donald initially refused to meet Sandra, who had called and claimed to have found evidence. He thought that this woman wouldn't be able to tell him anything good this time either. More words based on feelings and emotions, and no facts. However, Sandra insisted so much that Donald reluctantly agreed. The meeting place Sandra chose seemed a bit strange to Donald. She wanted to meet near David's country house where he met his end. Donald arrived there, and alongside Sandra, there was another woman waiting for him. Donald, not immediately, but recalled her after she introduced herself. Yes, exactly. This woman had worked for David for many years, and Donald had seen her when he visited his brother. Donald, I greatly respected your brother. He was a just man. But when the police asked me if I heard what happened in the house, I said no. Understand me correctly. I was afraid. And now Sandra says that you can protect me if I testify. I'm doing this in memory of David. At first, Donald became angry. Why are you all always so afraid? You act like rats yourselves. And then you complain that there's chaos and lawlessness in the country. So, did you lie to the police? No, not entirely. I didn't finish my sentence. The housemaid said quietly. I didn't say that I heard the argument. Besides, what do you want from me? An old woman. When the driver lies. A big guy who took Henry home. So, he's lying after all. Donald exclaimed. Of course, he's lying. He came home already in the early morning. The police were already in the house. I saw him sneaking into the staff house, and he claims he slept there all night. It turns out he's afraid too. Even he doesn't dare to go against Albert. But I haven't told you the most important thing yet. About the cameras, recently installed in the house, not fully installed. Few knew about them. No one lets me into the house now, but you can go in and check the recordings. So, that's why you arranged a meeting for me here, said Donald, thoughtfully gazing at his brother's house. You know what I'll tell you now. If I find the recordings with the cameras, your testimony may not be needed. Well, if they are needed, I guarantee that nothing will happen to you and your loved ones. I give you my word. There was only one guard in the brother's house, and he adamantly refused to let Donald in. So, Donald called Layla, saying he'd like to visit the country house. Why? Layla squeaked in fear. I just want to visit my brother's house. What's wrong with that? Layla, are you hiding something from me? If not, tell the guard to let me in. After some hesitation, Layla asked to pass the phone to the guard. Hearing the owner's voice, he opened the gate for Donald. After viewing the recording, Donald sat in one place for a long time, resting his head on his hands. He didn't care about Albert. He knew him vaguely. But Layla, despite having his own children, Donald loved his niece as a daughter. Layla, how could you? David raised an unworthy daughter. The next day, Donald decisively stormed into the office of the local police chief. Hello, Donald. How can I help you? The chief asked. Help? Are you helpful at all? Do you even control what's happening here? The investigation into my brother's case is being poorly conducted. Your Felix wrongly accused my brother's killer and manipulates evidence against him without intending to find the real murderer. Where did you get this idea? The police chief paled. I've been in your city for only a few days, but I already know everything. Albert planted a suspect on the investigator, his own son. Albert. Why would he do that? It's his son. Why turn him into a killer if he isn't? Because the real killer is him, Donald declared. Albert. A killer? The chief murmured. Are you sure about what you're saying? You can't throw baseless accusations around. Why do you think they're baseless? If I say something, it means I have evidence. Here, on this flash drive, is the surveillance footage. Let's watch it together on your computer. As the scenes of the police arriving at David's house flickered on the screen, the police chief paused the recording. Silence filled the room for a few seconds. Then Donald spoke. So, in your opinion, are these baseless accusations? How is this possible? The office owner whispered. How did they not discover this recording? I'm overseeing this case, and it was claimed that the cameras weren't working and didn't record anything on that day. I told you, the investigation is poorly conducted, and the girl in the video, she's your niece, David's daughter, right? And so what? Donald asked sharply. I don't know how to tell you. If we include the recording in the case, she won't be a witness but an accomplice. She helped remove the body from the house and get rid of the evidence. I understand that. What now? David was my only brother, and he raised an unworthy daughter. I want Layla to be held accountable under the full extent of the law. Also, Albert, release the innocent guy immediately. If it weren't for his mother, I wouldn't have learned the truth. Heroic woman. I hope I don't need to explain what to do next, Donald said as he stood up, but then seemed to recall something. Oh, by the way, regarding your investigator Felix, I believe he has no place in law enforcement. Do you hear me? Of course, the police chief agreed. Felix will be suspended, and an investigation into his actions will be conducted. The police chief also rose from his chair and escorted Donald to the door, extending his hand for a farewell with an obsequious demeanor. Albert's arrest happened loudly, with a scandal. They arrested him right in his office. You'll regret this. You'll regret it deeply, Albert shouted. Call investigator Felix. Felix is no longer involved in this case, one of the arresting officers replied, and Albert began to realize that some higher forces had intervened. Most likely David's brother. Albert, head held high, was escorted in handcuffs from the office, surrounded by people in uniform. The case promised to be high profile, and somehow, information had already leaked to the press. Flashes of cameras clicked outside their office building. When the law enforcement came for Layla, she screamed and struggled, refusing to let them handcuff her. "What do you think you're doing? By what right? Let me make a call. You'll all be fired. Tomorrow, you'll find yourselves on the streets. I promise. You'll wash yourselves in bloody tears." Then Layla's gaze fell on her silently standing uncle, Donald, in the doorway. Initially, she hesitated upon seeing the expression on his face. However, she started crying again. "Uncle Donald, what is happening? Tell them, what is there to say?" The man asked with an icy tone that Layla had never heard directed at her before. "I have nothing to say. They, like me, already know everything. You've miscalculated. Layla, your uncle installed cameras in the country house that you didn't know about. How could you? Layla, he's your father, and he always loved you. You had everything. What kind of person have you become?" That's when the girl got scared, really scared. She lowered her head and allowed them to take her away. At the same time, an old car, the one Sandra drove since her son switched to an expensive foreign car, was parked near the prison. Sandra and Naomi sat inside, their eyes fixed on the doors. The wait seemed agonizingly long. When Henry finally appeared, Naomi couldn't contain her joyful exclamation. She jumped out of the car, ran a few meters, and threw herself at Henry's neck. He hugged her first, then Naomi's mother, still looking at them with a puzzled expression. "What's going on? I was released so unexpectedly, with no explanation. Were there new evidence? Did the driver decide to tell the truth?" Yes. Naomi bounced with joy. "Evidence was found. You're completely cleared, but not thanks to the driver. Only thanks to your mom. You have such a wonderful mom, Henry. Not everyone could do what she did. That I never doubted." Henry smiled, hugging Sandra again. "Thanks, Mom. Thank you for being there for me. But please, tell me everything that happened step by step." Henry learned about who actually killed David and how it was proven in the car when the satisfied mother drove him home. Their emotions overwhelmed the young man. "Impossible. Father, I've certainly changed my opinion about him a lot. But to this extent, did he deliberately try to shift the blame onto me? I never expected this from him. Mom, I've already apologized to you, but I'll say it again. Forgive me. I was a fool. You warned me about Albert, and I believed him. From this moment on, I want nothing to do with him. I'll return the car and everything I earned at the company." Henry attended Albert and Leela's trial only once when he was called as a witness. After giving brief testimony, he left the courtroom, not wanting to see his father or, now, his ex-wife for another second. In the end, Albert and Layla received the maximum sentences for their charges. Albert refused to believe it until the end. Even in jail, he tried to bribe the right people to gain freedom. However, people avoided him, frightened by Donald's influence. A year passed. Henry started his own trucking company, transporting goods across the country. With time, he learned the ropes of the business, and the company began to turn a profit. The wedding with Naomi was joyful, and the newlyweds were genuinely happy. They tried to live without dwelling on the past and their mistakes. Recently, Henry was delighted by the news of his wife's pregnancy. One evening, while at home, Henry opened his laptop, intending to do some work, and noticed an email from an unknown sender. Clicking on it, he began to read. As he realized who the sender was, his first instinct was to delete it without finishing. But he couldn't, and found himself captivated, reading until the end. "Hello, son. It's your father, Albert, writing to you. You're probably surprised how I can write, having internet access in prison. But you know, even here, money matters. I live a little better than the ordinary inmates. But it's not freedom, of course. I hesitated to write to you for a long time. I know you despise me, hate me, and you're right. I had time to think, to reassess my life. I'm ready to admit that I lived wrong. I had no family. But then I met you, my only son. You could have been my family, and you were open to it. But, as always, I continued to live by my own rules. I admit it. I crossed you many times, then betrayed you and wanted to erase you from my life. What do I have now? Nothing. Yes, I clearly see now that money cannot replace family. Loved ones who sincerely love you not for something, but just because you exist. I'm not used to such words, but still forgive me, son. Forgive me for everything. If you can, be happy with your Naomi. Don't betray her. And then, at my age, you'll have someone to rush home to, someone who will wait for you every day, specifically you. And it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor. I regret many things, and here's something else. Even if I ever get out of here, I won't have any other children anyway. And since I officially acknowledged you, you remain my sole heir. I don't intend to change anything. Whether you accept my inheritance or not is up to you. But know that I would really like my money to stay in your hands and those of your children. You're a good guy, and you can raise them right. They won't turn out like me, for sure. Money won't spoil either you or your children. So, once again, I ask you to forgive me, and when the time comes, don't refuse their inheritance.